A 30-year-old man was hit by a truck and died. He had been working all his life just to get by because he didn't have any special skills or talents. But everything changed in an instant when the truck couldn't hit him. When he opened his eyes again, someone was calling him Lord Jink. He was confused because his name was Saito Jinkuro. Suddenly, he woke up, and the woman who was calling him Lord Jink was crying tears of joy. She told him that he had collapsed in front of the Crown Prince. Not only was he removed from the Crown Prince's guard, but he was also banished from the country. Jink didn't understand what was happening, so he asked the woman to explain where he was and who he was. She revealed that he was actually a 14-year-old named Jink Nonland, the heir of Duke Nonland. Since he was young, he had been serving as a guard for the Crown Prince of the Kingdom of Rosalta. However, earlier that day, the Crown Prince had ordered him never to come before him again. This was because the Nonland family was known for producing skilled spearmen, but Jink didn't have any talent for it. Feeling pressured, he had gotten into delinquency. After many mistakes, the Crown Prince had enough and took away his title and position. Jink let out a heavy sigh, realizing he had been reincarnated as a troublesome kid. Memories from his previous life started flooding back slowly. Now, he had two sets of memories. The maid noticed Jink seemed calmer today, perhaps because he had fainted earlier. Jink realized that Jinkuru's traits were becoming more prominent in his personality. As Jink got up from the bed, he remembered the maid mentioning something about his banishment. It shocked him, and he asked her to confirm if he heard correctly. The maid nodded, explaining that upon learning about Jink's dismissal from the guard, the master disowned him. Lord Esther was chosen as the new successor. Jink was given only a month to leave the country. Knowing that the world beyond the capital was filled with monsters, Jink understood that this exile was essentially a death sentence. He felt upset that he had reincarnated as an outcast. Turning to the maid, Elsa, he asked for her help in dressing him. Suddenly, he noticed a status screen next to him. His eyes widened in astonishment as he gazed at it. It seemed like he was the only one who could see it. As he focused more, he could see the statistics in detail. Based on what Jink knew about this world, only people with incredibly rare magic eyes possessed this ability. He concentrated intensely on checking his own status, and managed to succeed after a few attempts. To his surprise, he discovered that his swordsmanship rank was S. His spear skills were graded F, while his proficiency in water and recovery magic ranked S. His mastery of earth magic and alchemy was graded A, and his skills in fire and wind magic were rated B. What truly stunned him, though, was that his enhancement was graded S. Based on what he knew, there were only 3 enchanters worldwide, so he believed he might be the 4th. This made him feel excited because having such a rare ability could be valuable. With this power, he could make various things stronger, which might help him survive in the world. His thoughts were interrupted when his younger brother, Esther, showed up. He apologized to Jink for not being able to assist him earlier in front of the Crown Prince. Esther then brought him some money and a spear. Jink expressed his gratitude and asked if Esther could gather some travel supplies for him in exchange for the items he didn't need. Esther agreed, and Jink gave him a list of the things he required. The next day, Esther showed Jink all the stuff he had asked him to buy. Esther wondered how his brother would manage to carry so many goods by himself. Jink told him he had a trick to share, something even their father didn't know. He demonstrated the skill of creating an item box, and a door magically appeared. Esther was amazed and peeked inside to find a huge empty space. He praised his brother for having such an extraordinary skill. Jink noticed that Esther's status also indicated a small item box, but Esther seemed unaware of it. Jink wanted to tell him about it, but he decided to keep his ability to appraise things a secret. He thought of a subtle way to let Esther know and asked him if he could fetch a small bottle of his red body fluid. Esther agreed without hesitation. Jink also requested Esther to accompany him to the Adventurers Guild for registration, and Esther, being the supportive brother he was, agreed. As Jink and Esther walked through the streets on their way to the guild, they heard the commoners talking badly about him. Jink felt it was understandable that they disliked him because of his previous rude behavior toward them. The only ones who stood by him were Elsa and Esther. Elsa, who had been his wet nurse and had cared for him since he was a child, naturally supported him. However, Jink couldn't understand why Esther admired him. His memories didn't offer any insight into this puzzling situation. They arrived at the guild and completed the registration process. The staff there were rude to him. In the evening, Jink practiced sword training because he had a high rank in swordsmanship. He thought about how things might have been different if he had discovered his abilities earlier. During training, he felt light and performed exceptionally well. At the dinner table, Gordon Nonlin, the head of the family, told Jink that it would be his final meal there. Jink acknowledged this, excusing himself to get ready for the next day. In his room, he enchanted some gear, including an outfit and accessories, totaling 27 levels. When combined with Jink's base level of 25, his overall reinforcement level reached 52. Using this ability tired him out. To replenish his energy, he drank a mana potion before beginning work on Esther's gift. The next day, Esther and Elsa were at the capital's west gate to see him off. He thanked both of them and gave Esther a card and a box as a present for helping him. He told Esther to drop some blood on the card secretly later. He advised him to open the box when he had left the country. Esther cried as Jink said goodbye to them and left. Jink was determined to start his adventure as he looked at the mountains outside the capital. Jink's first goal was to reach the border, but there were many cities in between that took days of traveling. He thought of using his enchant-boosted body reinforcement. After activating the skill, his body started running crazy fast. He got excited, thinking that now he could reach the destination way sooner. He stopped at a place after an hour. No matter how much he ran, he did not run out of breath. He was extremely satisfied with the enchanting skill he possessed. He suddenly caught sight of several bodies lying around injured. He got startled and started screaming. He calmed down after a few moments, but some goblins appeared to attack him suddenly. His body reacted fast to the attacks and started moving before he could think. With enchantment, he easily defeated all the goblins. After the fight, he sat down by a tree and deduced that he could level up properly. Jink had to calm himself down a little after the battle because there was a gruesome scene before him and he wasn't used to it. In this world, it was normal to take equipment from people who had been defeated in battles, so Jink took some stuff from people lying on the ground. If he brought back the remains to the guild, he could get some rewards from the surviving family, but he preferred to be out of the country as soon as possible. He got to dissecting monsters after that. The subjugation proof for goblins was an ear and a stone near their heart, which could be turned in at the guild for money. Jink was very bothered by the dissection process, but he did it anyway. Jink confronted a lot of goblins and kobolds on the way to the post town Rio. He got used to battle by the time he reached the town the following morning. He checked his status and noted that he had leveled up a lot. He took out a bunch of extra weapons from his item box, as a piece of equipment could only be enchanted once. Jink traveled a bit further and then stopped at a spot where adventurers rested. There were several adventurers nearby. He drank a mana potion to recharge when suddenly some injured men appeared shouting for assistance. They needed an X potion desperately. Another adventurer nearby mentioned how rare and precious X potions were, doubting anyone would give one away. One of the injured men dropped to his knees, begging. Jink stepped forward, announcing he had some. Judging by their appearances, the injured men didn't seem dangerous, so Jink decided to help. They gave an EX potion to one of the badly injured men who was immediately healed. Jink was surprised by how quickly it worked. A man from the gang thanked Jink and introduced himself as Alec Thunder, the leader of a group called Dragon's Tears. He gave some money to Jink and apologized for it not being enough. Alec explained that they had encountered a powerful red ogre, a high-level monster, which left them badly injured. He bowed to Jink and offered to become his slave to repay him for saving their brother's life. In this world, slavery was common, but Jink refused Alec's offer, not wanting him as a slave. Suddenly, a horde of orcs appeared, attracted by the scent of blood. These orcs were lower-ranked monsters, so Jink believed they could handle them. However, the men who had faced the ogre were still recovering, and their equipment was in disarray. Jink retrieved various weapons from his item box and distributed them among the men to prepare for the fight. Jink swiftly dealt with some of the orcs, while the others joined in the battle. Out of nowhere, a group of men was suddenly knocked out by a single powerful blow, delivered by an orc general with a B rank. Jink attempted to take on the orc alone, but the general easily pushed him back with one punch. If Jink hadn't been protected by an enchantment, that hit would have ended the game for him. The orc attempted another strike, but Alec intervened, attacking from behind. With the orc's attention now on Alec, Jink seized the opportunity and stabbed it in the head. Despite the difficulty, he successfully managed to decapitate the monster. Seeing their general defeated, the remaining orcs fled the scene. Alec praised Jink and asked if he was a high-ranked adventurer. Jink replied that he was only a beginner with a G ranking and managed to defeat the monster with Alec's help. Other adventurers nearby overheard Alec mentioning Jink's name and wondered if he was the same Jink Nonland who had been exiled. Jink decided there was no point in hiding, so he confirmed his identity. The adventurers were surprised because Jink didn't match the rumors they had heard about him. Jink then asked Alec about his plans. Alex said they were heading to Morbiberg, but now he considered himself Jink's slave and would follow him anywhere. Jink felt pressured by Alex's insistence. To keep Alex safe on the journey to Morbiberg, Jink suggested they travel together. Once they reached the capital, Jink planned to introduce Alec to his brother, Esther, and give him something to repay him for becoming his slave. Alec burst into tears and hugged Jink tightly to express his gratitude. Meanwhile, 3 people watched them from a distance, including an elf woman who found Jink intriguing. Jink's party had to battle the remaining orc hordes to cross the border. Eventually, they reached the Goblins' Forest. As the name suggests, the only creatures here should be goblins, which Jink can handle easily. He takes out many of them without much trouble, but their numbers are overwhelming. The rest of the party joins in to defeat them all. After the fight, everyone is exhausted and resting on the ground. One person asks Jink why he's the only one not badly injured, even though he was on the front line. Jink nervously chuckles and explains that it might be because of his strength advantage. Technically, he's not wrong, because his ability to enchant objects with magic has boosted his physical capabilities. The elf girl from earlier interrupted him and called him impressive. She introduced herself as Karen, the leader of the party's Sacred Flame. A man with her introduced himself as Bogard. The third person of the party took a good look at Jink and figured out that he was an enchanter. This suddenly put a smile on his face, and he excitedly introduced himself as Will. Jink shook Will's hand and checked the status of their party. He noted that they were an A-ranked party with highly skilled members. Will had the skill weapon appraisal mentioned in his status. Jink wondered if this was how Will figured out his enchanting ability. He asked Will how he knew. Will replied that he saw that all Jink's equipment was imbued with physical enhancement +8, which was a feat achieved by enchanters only, as it was challenging to enhance multiple pieces of equipment with the same value. The adventurers around him heard the conversation and started bombarding Jink with questions. Will inquired if Jink would be willing to enchant something for him at a reasonable price. Jink answered that certain conditions had to be met for performing this ability. The owner's blood had to be dropped on the object to be enchanted. In that case, only the owner could use the enchantment effects on the equipment. Alternatively, Jink would have to go through Morbiberg. Jink forbade the party from telling anyone about this ability until he was officially on the same level as them. The party members agreed to his terms. Will stated that they were all adventurers of Qual, and they would have loved to have an enchanter in their country. Jink was open to any price for enchantments because he had never met enchanters before, so he didn't know the usual prices. He offered them some cards and explained how each could be used. Will was shocked to learn that Jink could provide appraisal, magic bag, and alchemy magic with his rare ability. All 3 members had their equipment enchanted. The only card left was an appraisal one for all 3. However, Jink was very tired by this point. He kept drinking mana potions to stay energized. The members dripped some of their blood on the cards to enchant them. Will was pleased with his appraisal card. He asked Jink if he knew their talents, since the card only listed their skills. Jink replied that talents were uncertain. Some people's talents might never develop, so they weren't listed on the card. The adventurers of the Sacred Flame gave Jink a hefty sum of gold and valuable items in exchange for enchantment services. Will found it odd that Jink, who possessed many rare items, was traveling without a caravan. When asked, Jink revealed that he had been exiled. This revelation shocked them, prompting inquiries into the reason. Jink explained that he had always been shunned by others, so being falsely accused was inevitable. He had kept his abilities secret, even from his own family. Fearing exploitation by those in power, he harbored distrust toward everyone. Will expressed gratitude for Jink's honesty and invited him to accompany them to the Qual Kingdom, assuring him of a warm reception. There were many monsters on the border, but with Jink and his companions together, getting through them was easy. Jink agreed to join them, and they began their journey. They quickly arrived at Morbiberg. Since no one recognized Jink there, he decided to go shopping. Jink happily purchased various items, including an armor suit and a spear for Esther. The shopkeeper was surprised to see such a young boy buying expensive items. Jink paid for everything and took all the items with him. He did his best to enchant the items intended as gifts for Esther. Jink consumed many mana potions and spent the entire night enchanting. The next day, he handed a package to Alec to take to Esther. He also gave everyone cards showing their statuses. He practiced a lot of enchanting magic because he wanted to level up his skills. He said goodbye to Alec's group and headed to the border with Sacred Flame. Back at the non-land residence, Esther was put under house arrest for 50 days. His father declared Esther as the new heir and told him to forget about his brother. Alone in his room, Esther cried as he remembered Jink. After Jink left, Esther's father would often beat him when he found out Esther had been doing things he didn't approve of. Esther would get scolded for going against his father's wishes, and as punishment, he was confined to the house for 50 days. His father even declared that Jink was no longer part of the family. Locked away in his room, Esther worried about his brother's well-being. Despite the situation, he had faith that Jink was still alive and doing all right somewhere out there. Meanwhile, in another country, Jink was busy fighting monsters. He would often mention Esther's name, expressing how hard he was working. Jink was joined by members of the Sacred Flame who fought alongside him. Will, using his wind cutter magic, effortlessly sliced through a giant monster. Jink was impressed by Will's A-ranked skills and was told that he would soon level up with his enchantment skills. Will admitted he was better with flame magic, but the forest restricted its use. Karen and Bogard finished off the remaining monsters. Curious if lower-ranked adventurers could now cross the border since they had cleared out most of the monsters, Jink asked Karen. She explained that this area was still off-limits for adventurers ranked C or lower. When merchants crossed the border, they usually had guards ranked A or B with them. Going deeper meant risking encounters with wyverns, which scared Jink a lot. Jink and the party had reached the country's border. Massive gates stood before them, guarded by several guards. Jink wondered if they could pass through smoothly because it was said that nobody exiled had ever slipped past the border. Karen and Bogard reassured him, promising to intervene if things didn't go as expected. A ranker was treated like an earl or count, while an S-ranker was like a duke. Inspectors there were ranked up to viscounts at most, so their party had authority over them. A guard suddenly appeared and requested their IDs. He was shocked to see Jink's ID, realizing he was Jink Nonland, who had been exiled. He asked how Jink had managed to get there in just 5 days. Karen stepped forward and asked why it mattered. She pointed out that he had been ordered to leave the country, and he had complied, so there shouldn't be anything to complain about. The guard got offended and yelled at her, questioning how a commoner could speak to him like that. Karen shoved her ID in the guard's face, and he started sweating when he realized she was an S-ranked adventurer. Karen threatened him, saying she would test her weapon on him if he didn't shut his mouth. The guard got scared and ran away. A higher-ranked guard showed up and said sorry to them for his subordinate's behavior. He asked why people from the Kual Kingdom were traveling with someone like Jink, whom he described as a disrespectful man. The guard said Jink had apparently tried to poison the head of his family to get their money. Jink was shocked to hear this new accusation of attempted murder. He figured his family must have really disliked him to make up such stories. Will explained to the guard that they were only escorting Jink because they heard he had been exiled. According to the kingdom's rules, when someone gets exiled, they had to leave the country within a certain time and never return. Jink followed the rules, so nobody should stop him. But the guard thought the time Jink took was too quick, which seemed suspicious. Will stood up for Jink, saying that they'd been traveling together for 3 days and had no issues with him. The guard tried to argue more, but eventually gave up and let them go. They reached the territory of the Kual Kingdom. Jink thanked Will and the others for their help throughout the journey. Will asked him if he had ever considered how the Rosalta Kingdom would react if they found out he was an enchanter. He explained they might try to take him back, or even eliminate him. That's why he suggested Jink register with the Kual Kingdom. If he found a job in town and leveled up regularly, he could eventually reveal he was an enchanter on his own terms. The people of Kual would support him, and as long as he was registered with Kual, Rosalta couldn't harm him. Jink agreed to the idea and decided to visit the guild. Will gave Bogart some instructions that Jink didn't understand. Later, Jink excitedly told Karen he had enchanted a healing card for her, and she happily accepted it. When Karen and the guy reached the Adventurers Guild, everyone glanced at Karen. They seemed fascinated by her presence. Some looked envious that she was accompanied by a new guy. They asked the receptionist for registration details. The guy then asked Jink to display the things he had hunted previously. Jink suggested they move to a larger area for this. Then they all moved to the guild's backyard. Jink took out some bags from his item box. The bags were filled with goblins' ears. He didn't have time to dissect orcs, so he brought their bodies with him. He angled the opening of the item box towards the ground, and numerous orcs started falling. The guys assessing him froze in their places, their mouths hanging open. Converting all the stuff into money made a total of 24.3 million yen. Jink was elated that he had earned this much money. He could never dream about getting his savings up to 6 digits when he was Jinkaroo. He had accumulated enough points to rank up to level C, but he still had to pass a rank-up test to attain that level officially. He was going to have a mock fight with the examiner for that test. he got guided to the battleground. A man appeared behind him and introduced himself as the guildmaster, Snow. He stated that he would be the one fighting Jink. News quickly spread throughout the guild that the master was personally testing someone. People were curious about the challenger's skills. At the testing area, the referee announced that they would combine rank D and C tests to save time. The guildmaster expressed interest in testing the challenger, Jink. Despite warnings from the referee about the risks, the guildmaster was eager to participate. Karen reassured him from the crowd, offering to heal any injuries. This drew anger from some men in the audience who resented Karen's attention towards the guildmaster. The referee signaled the start of the fight. The guildmaster attacked first, charging fast at Jink. Jink barely dodged in time. The master began a series of attacks that Jink tried to dodge. He was so swift with his attacks that Jink couldn't keep up and got a minor hit on his cheek. The master mentioned that usually opponents gave up after 3 minutes, so it was impressive that Jink was still standing. It had been a while since he faced this kind of resistance. This time, Jink tried to initiate an attack, but the master easily dodged it. Jink noted that his swordsmanship level was 104, so it wasn't surprising that he was this good. They continued trying to attack each other. The audience was impressed by Jink for keeping up with the master. The guildmaster started to get tired, but Jink remained unfazed. He applauded Jink for holding up against him for so long and declared that it was time to finish this. Both of them charged at each other simultaneously. Using his enchantment, Jink ducked down, avoiding the master's attack and landed a hit on his torso. The audience was shocked when they saw the match's outcome. The master fell to his knees, admitting defeat. Karen rushed over and offered to help heal him. Weakly, the master said a potion would do. Karen then turned to Jink, poking his cheeks, saying she'd heal him instead. Jink blushed, saying he wasn't even hurt. Will approached, clapping, impressed that Jink had defeated the guildmaster. He asked for the secret, and Jink hesitantly confessed he had redone the enchantment on his gear. Will then loudly announced that Jink had been an enchanter all along. Everyone at the venue was shocked by this revelation. The guildmaster couldn't believe that Jink was an enchanter because there were only 3 in the world. Will assured him of Jink's ability, mentioning his membership in the Sacred Flame. He showed the master his appraisal card to prove that Jink also had the skill. Sweating, the master tried to process everything. Jink reassured him, saying he was strong and wouldn't have won without enchantments. The master nervously chuckled and declared Jink a temporary C-ranked adventurer. Jink celebrated at first, but then he started to worry when he realized his rank was just temporary. He asked Will why he wasn't a full rank yet. Will explained that enchanters automatically start at S rank, but until it's official, he's stuck as a temporary C. It was important for the guild to see his abilities in combat, because if he wasn't good enough, the government would send guards to watch him all the time. Jink wondered why Will was helping him so much. Will was surprised by the question, but then grinned, saying he wanted to see what kind of story Jink would create. He promised that with his enchantment and assessment skills, Jink might even reach SS rank, which is higher than S and comes with freedom from authority. Jink could become like a feudal lord if he succeeded. Will asked if Jink was up for the challenge, knowing it would take a lot of effort. Thinking about all the unfair treatment he endured, Jink saw this as a chance to prove himself with his enchantment. He was determined to work hard and achieve SS rank. Jink sat inside a carriage surrounded by guards as he studied hard for an upcoming entrance exam. About halfway through the month, a commotion erupted outside. Jink, hearing the chaos, exited the carriage to assist his guards. Kobolds had launched an attack, and the guards were engaged in combat. Thinking it was an opportunity to test his water magic, Jink conjured a water ball and hurled it at the kobolds, blocking their path. However, the water merely soaked the kobolds without harming them. Realizing his mistake, Jink fled, focusing on making his next attack stronger and faster. Concentrating, he created a larger, more powerful water ball, which swiftly overwhelmed the kobolds in its path. After they managed to defeat all the monsters, a guard asked if Jink had used enchantment for the previous attacks too. Jink clarified that he already had an aptitude for water magic. The guard apologized to him for interrupting his studies and letting him fight, even though they were there to protect him. Jink reassured them that it was alright, and that it helped him get some magic training. 2 weeks earlier, Will and Bogart had taken him to a count's mansion, saying that they would stay the night there. Jink protested a little, thinking that staying with a noble might not be a good idea. Will defended Count Brand, saying that he drew a line between himself and the snobbish nobles, and had helped Will when he started out too. Jink gave in and entered the palace. Count Brand respectfully shook Jink's hand and introduced himself. Jink politely responded to the Count's greeting. The Count had prepared a meal for them, so they all headed to the dining table. Jink felt excited when he saw all the food because he had been surviving on preserved foods for a while. During the meal, the Count asked Jink about his future plans. Jink explained that he planned to travel through Qual while trying to rank up. Eventually, he aimed to leave the Qual Kingdom and settle in the Kingdom of Yamato. He intended to enroll in Yamato Royal Academy, but he achieved S rank much faster than he had expected. The Count reassured him that his high rank guaranteed his status now, and he didn't need to go all the way to Yamato to avoid interference from Rosalta. Jink insisted that he wanted to explore the world and have more adventures. The Count suggested he visit Qualarut, the capital of Qual, where the esteemed Qual Royal Academy is located. It's quite challenging to get into, but with Jink's status, it would be easier. For a thrilling experience, the Count recommended Gamel, a city built atop Qual's largest dungeon, rumored to have over 80 floors filled with various monsters. Karen mentioned that Jink would need to pass an entrance exam to get into the academy. Jink decided he would study during his travels to Qualarut. The Count proposed having an adventurer party accompany him, taking a route friendly territories as much as possible. Once in the capital, Jink could stay at the Count's estate. If he ran into any trouble, he could use the Count's name for assistance. Jink didn't understand why the Count was so willing to help him. The Count explained that he had a son Jink's age who was currently preparing for the exam, and he saw this as an opportunity for his son to make a new friend. Reflecting on his life as Jinkero, Jink realized that he had been stuck in the same routine for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to be passionate and excited about something new. But now, those feelings were coming back to him. Jink thanked the Count and the members of the Sacred Flame for their assistance. They shared their own plans and wished him luck on his journey. Returning to the present, throughout the journey, all Jink did was study. He met many people, fought numerous monsters, and even enchanted items for his escort party and the nobles he encountered all while studying. Dark circles had formed around his eyes by then. A guard informed him that they had reached the capital. Exiting his carriage, he exclaimed excitedly when he saw the enormous border wall, which was twice as big as Rosa's border. Jink wanted to explore the city, but his guard stopped him and asked him to wait until all official procedures were completed. After they crossed the wall, they arrived at Count Brand's house. Count Brand's wife, Maria, and his son, Chris, greeted them warmly. Chris immediately offered to give them a tour of the house, while Maria suggested that Jink should take a rest. Chris insisted it was fine and asked Jink to come along, but Jink collapsed from exhaustion. Chris and Maria became worried and called for a doctor. While lying motionless on the ground, Jink realized that his appraisal level had reached its maximum. Meanwhile, at the Qual Royal Palace, news spread that an enchanter had entered the country. The king, seated on the throne, asked if this information was confirmed. A butler confirmed it and mentioned that the enchanter wished to join the Royal Academy. The king decided that they needed to assess the enchanter's character and abilities. At the Qual Royal Academy, the entrance exam begins. Jink easily solves the exam, as this exam is only more challenging by this world's standards. Japanese exams are more complicated, and besides, he had studied till he literally passed out. Also, more points are allocated to the physical exam, so he should be fine. For the physical exam, they have a high-ranked appraisal expert assessing students' skills. He confirms that Jink indeed possesses enchantment and appraisal magic. He also notes that his specialty is water magic, and he has some skill in recovery magic. They move on to the demonstration part of the exam, and Jink shows off his water magic. After all exams, Jink is walking through a hall with Chris. Chris tells him that the written exam was not as bad as he thought. Thanks to Jink's help, he also praises the water cyclone that Jink demonstrated. Jink had used enchantment, so the ground ended up flooded after his water cyclone demonstration. Jink assumes that the old man who assessed him, Marcus Panam, would tell the king about his enchantment as he is a high-ranked individual. The fact that he is an enchanter might reach Rosalta sooner than expected. At the royal palace, the king inquires about Marquis about Jink's status. Marquis tells him that Jink is also skilled in swordsmanship and body reinforcement, on top of enchantment. Moreover, he also has an extra-large item box. The King of Qual, Normal Qual, finds it interesting. Marquis further adds that he has also scored 96% on the written exam, which is one of their all-time high scores. Undoubtedly, Jink would place first in the Magic Department entrance exam. One panel member suggested they needed to win over a prodigy like him. The king asked about his personality. They had heard that he tried to poison his father, so if an influential person like him had evil intentions, he would have posed a threat to Qual. Marquis answered that he had not seen any criminal titles when he appraised him, but for someone belonging to House Nonland, his spearmanship skill had been strikingly low. He believed that Rosalta had spread false information about him and exiled him unjustly. Due to this, Jink did not respect nobles and authority figures. If they wanted to reach out to him, they should have done it with caution. The king wondered why Rosalta would exile him for such an insignificant reason, such as having no talent in spearmanship. They might have had some ulterior motive. They must have exiled him without knowing he was an enchanter. The king stood up and declared that Jink was now under their protection, but they would not have used his powers for their own interest. A few days later, Chris happily told Jink that he had placed first in the exam. They were both chosen as first-class students. Jink also congratulated him for securing second place. Chris informed Jink that the king would be inviting him for an audience soon. He asked if he possessed any formal clothes because he had only seen him in casual clothes so far. Jink told him that he had sold his fancy clothes after getting exiled. They decided to go shopping. Jink had to search for a place to live too, now that the exams were over. Jink went to Qual Slave Trading Company because he needed human resources. Slave trading was very common in this world, but Jink could never get used to it. He spotted a girl with a good aptitude rank and asked about her. The trader told him that her name was Nina and she was 12 years old. The original plan was to use her for other wrong things, but she was damaged in transport by a pack of wild dogs, so now she was there as a general slave. Jink told him that he had decided to take her. The man asked Jink to put a drop of his blood on her throat to start the subordination ritual. Jink did so, and the man started reciting the ritual. When it was over, the girl bowed down before Jink and declared herself as his subordinate. Back at Count Brand's home, Jink began a conversation by asking Nina about her origins. She explained that her parents were poor farmers who had to sell her because they couldn't afford to feed her. They felt relief after letting her go. Sensing it was a sensitive topic, Jink decided to stop asking questions about it. Instead, he outlined his 5 rules for her. She had to obey him without question, not harm him, never lie to him, keep his secrets, and not put him at a disadvantage. As long as she followed these rules, she had some freedom. Even though he was technically her master, he didn't want to overwork her. He assured her that he wouldn't hurt or punish her for small mistakes, and encouraged her to talk to him directly if something went wrong. Nina then asked if it was okay for her to avoid doing any inappropriate tasks, considering her past as a damaged slave. Jink was startled by the question, and told her that he had never expected anything like that from her in the first place. She argued that it was the only thing she was suitable for. She couldn't do manual labor and couldn't read or write. Her parents had called her useless before getting rid of her. She got angry while quoting her parents' words. Jink gave her an X potion and asked her to heal herself with it. Nina was surprised that he was giving such a valuable item to a slave. Jink consoled her by telling her positive points about herself. He said that he had chosen Nina for her talent in cooking, and she had room for growth in other skills too. He held her shoulder and told her he needed her help in achieving his goals. Nina had cried when someone showed her kindness for the first time, and she thanked them. After a few days, Chris told Jink that Nina had quickly gotten better at cooking. Jink looked sick, his face pale, and his stomach bloated from drinking too many mana potions. He was desperate for money, so he'd been trying to use alchemy on Junk. Their conversation was interrupted when Nina showed up with a jar of cookies. She was dressed in a cute maid outfit, and all her scars had vanished. She gave Jink some cookies and then left. After she left, Jink asked Chris if he knew any slaves who were good at fighting. Chris told him about the criminal slave office, a place where violent people were kept. Jink stood in the academy hallway thinking about saving up money for a combat slave. Chris joined him, and they chatted about going to classes that day. As they walked through the hallway, all the girls admired Jink, and Chris teased him for being so popular. Jink told Chris that being the center of attention didn't make him happy because those girls were only interested in his status, not him. He said if he married them, they would drain him of every penny. Chris agreed, adding that these girls seemed to be from lower-ranking noble families, eager to marry someone of higher status. Jink believed these girls should focus on supporting themselves before trying to marry into wealth. A lovely girl walked in and greeted Jink. She said her name was Najenda Qual, and she was a top student from the statecraft department. Jink was amazed to hear this, because she had the title of the first princess of the kingdom. He and Chris immediately bowed respectfully and greeted her back. Najenda told them to relax and not be so formal. Since they were in the same year, she wanted them to be closer friends. Jink mentioned that he was an adventurer and would be out exploring most of the time, so they might not see each other much. Nagenda replied that she would also be busy assisting her father with government matters. Jink and Chris were clearly impressed by her. Suddenly, they heard a big guy bothering a student. Jink asked Nagenda about the guy. She told him that the guy was Duke Rancel's heir. Back in junior academy, he used his father's name to do whatever he wanted. It reached a point where many students quit the academy because of his actions. It seemed he got into this academy as a third-class student. His father was good at covering things up, so he never faced consequences for his actions. The guy made his way to Jink and the others. He greeted Nagenda, but she replied rudely. Then he turned to Jink and offered him to join his family's service, saying he would make excellent use of Jink's S-rank ability. He mocked Jink, saying that as a mere commoner, he should consider serving his family in honor. Jink got upset by his words and punched him in the face. He told him that being noble doesn't matter at this school. Here, your status is determined by your class. So, if a lower-class student like him disrespects a higher-class student, the lower-class student can be punished right away. Jink left the guy there and walked off with Chris and Nagenda. Nagenda asked Jink if he was going to accept her father's invitation for a meeting. Jink said he'd like to, but he didn't have fancy clothes and he needed his money for other things. The princess told him to wear his usual clothes since he was an adventurer. A few days later, Jink showed up before the king. The king greeted him warmly and said sorry for the trouble caused by some of his country's nobles, who kept asking Jink to make appraisal cards during his travels. Jink replied that he didn't mind because he made good money from it. Then the king asked if they could rely on him for future enhancement and appraisal requests. Jink felt happy that the king acknowledged his enchantment side job and agreed to help. The king then asked about Jink's quarrel with Duke Rancel's heir. Jink explained that he couldn't stand people who abused their power and act selfishly. Like Duke Rancel's heir, he admitted to reacting impulsively and said he'd accept any punishment from the king. The king praised him for his beliefs and told him not to worry about what might happen because of the argument. He congratulated Jink for coming first in the written exam and offered to reward him with whatever he wanted. Jink said he wanted permission to buy human resources from the criminal slave sales office. He explained that he needed slaves to help him explore Gamel's labyrinth and was worried about spies from Rosalta sneaking in. He thought slaves were the safest choice. The king admired his clever plan and gave him permission to buy the criminal slaves. Jink and Nina went to the criminal slave sales office. As they walked through different cells with criminals, Nina felt scared. In one cell, Jink noticed a slave who caught his eye. He thought the guy had potential for growth and combat skills. Curious, Jink asked the guy about his crime. The guy explained that he had a troubled relationship with his father's second wife. She tried to kill him to inherit his father's wealth, and he ended up accidentally killing her in self-defense. Nina told Jink that the guy's price was too high. Jink wanted to buy him, but it would drain all his money. Plus, he still needed to find a place to live. He wondered why no noble had bought such an impressive guy. When he asked the guard said people were scared of him because of his crime. Ian interrupted by saying that his father wanted to repurchase him, but his price was 10 times higher for family members. His father couldn't gather that much money, and he lost the courage to face his family. Nina told Jink that she didn't find this guy scary. Unlike other criminals, Nina's words gave Jink the final push he needed to make his decision. He announced that he would buy Ian. At Count Brand's wife's request, King Qual gifted Jink a mansion. Chris also gathered more requests for appraisal cards for Jink. Nina practiced reading, writing, and cooking. Ian trained his wind magic and swordsmanship, and he showed impressive progress as expected. However, Jink noticed that Ian looked worried sometimes. Jink encouraged him to talk openly, but Ian didn't say anything. Deciding to ask directly, Jink and Ian headed to the market. While there, they noticed a guy in a cloak who seemed to be following them. Jink and Ian were out shopping for things they wanted. After they finished shopping, Jink reminded Ian to speak up if he had any concerns, as being forgetful could be risky during fights. Suddenly, a young boy appeared, pointing a spear at Jink. He demanded that Jink stop using his brother however he pleased and let him go, or else they would have to fight. Jink checked the boy's strength and saw it was much weaker compared to Ian's. The boy even had a title that said Ian's Leftovers. Jink mentioned he was a top-ranked adventurer, and the boy wasn't in a position to fight him. The boy yelled again for Ian to be set free. Jink, getting annoyed, said he couldn't release Ian because he had bought him for a high price. Amidst the chaos ahead, Ian knelt down and said sorry to Jink on behalf of his brother, pleaded with Jink to spare his brother's life. Ian's brother yelled at him, telling him not to kneel before someone like Jink. The people around them started talking, and Jink realized he looked like the bad guy in front of everyone. Ian asked his brother how he couldn't hate him for taking their mother's life. Ash, the younger brother, said he was mad at him for that, but he found it disgraceful that he was treated like a slave. He wanted his smart and cool brother back. Their father had promised to save money to buy him, but someone bought him before that could happen. Jink interrupted and declared that he would entertain Ash as an opponent, drawing his sword. Ash charged at him with a spear, but Jink quickly cut it in two with his sword. Then he sliced Ash's cloak in half, causing him to fall to the ground. At that time, some guards showed up and tackled Ash to the ground. They were from the guild, and one of them asked Jink to come to the guild for a hearing. Jink told Ian to quickly stash all the shopping in his item box. They'd talk more later. When Jink got home, he was worn out. Nina ran to him crying and led him to Ian's room, where he found Ian attempting to take his own life. Jink grabbed the weapon away from him, but Ian protested, shouting that he deserved to die for disrespecting his family. Jink argued that it wouldn't solve anything and asked for a different punishment. Jink got angry and announced that they would leave for the dungeon city, Gamal, the next day. While they were exploring, Ian was being worked like a horse, doing everything that was asked of him. Eventually, Ian made a vow that he would keep working until he couldn't anymore. He asked Jink about Ash's situation, and Jink explained that Ash had been placed in the guild's isolation cell for a few days, but wouldn't face any further punishment. Ian thanked Jink for the lenient treatment and explained that Ash had been spoiled growing up, but he was still Ian's precious brother. Talking about his brother reminded Jink of Esther. He mentioned that he understood the feeling of having a precious brother and hoped that his own brother was doing well. Meanwhile, back at Nonland's residence in Rosalta, Elsa sat on a bed looking sick and exhausted with Esther by her side. Esther tried to comfort her by saying that he was sure Jink was fine, but he was worried about Elsa's condition because Jink was like a child to her. As he left Elsa's room, a boy appeared and asked him to return to the annex. Esther argued that he was still on the property and his father wasn't here, so it shouldn't be a big deal. The butler pointed out that Esther still seemed worried about Jink, the outcast. With an evil grin on his face, he advised Esther to forget about him since he was just a lowly criminal. Esther retorted that he must have been so bored now that the target of his teasing had left. As Esther started to leave, he reminded him of the times he had done petty things on the orders of the higher-ups. Esther regarded his brother as an amazing person. Esther believed that if anyone called his brother an outcast, they didn't really know him. In the past, to meet the expectations of the higher-ups as an heir, he trained with spears every day. This inspired Esther to learn spearmanship too. Jink was decent with the spear, but Esther quickly surpassed him. Whenever they sparred, Esther always won. Jink even asked Esther for tips to improve his skills. Esther knew Jink felt embarrassed being beaten by the son of a concubine, but he still treated Esther kindly. However, people's attitudes towards Jink changed a lot. His grandfather started favoring him and ignoring Jink. It was clear that rumors about Jink were being spread on purpose. Over time, the rumors got worse, and Jink found himself with nobody to rely on. Esther believed he was the one who had ruined his brother's life. At the Rosalta Royal Palace, a meeting took place. Noble Nonland, the former head of the family, and the kingdom's crown prince Elliot were also present. The audience expressed their dissatisfaction, saying that exiling an enchanter was a grave mistake. They added that it would be very difficult to retrieve him since he had escaped to Qual. Interrupting them, the crown prince asked how long they intended to dwell on this argument. A member of the council replied that since the crown prince had supported Jink's exile, he also had to bear responsibility. The prince confessed that he had assumed Jink would be taken care of by goblins or kobolds, but luck was on his side, allowing him to reach Qual. He remarked that Jink being an enchanter was actually good news, because it implied that he and his father also had the talent for enchanting. The king scolded him and tried to halt his speech, but Elliot persisted, stating that Jink shared the same bloodline as his father. He argued that since he and his father shared the same blood, they too could become enchanters like Jink. The council members were shocked when they found out. They wondered if Jink could be the king's secret son. The king looked nervous and asked Elliot how he found out. Elliot said he overheard his father and grandfather talking. He said he'd be the one to save the country. He told a guard to tell his followers. They had to find the smartest sages and wizards in Rosalta. They needed to figure out how to make him and his dad into enchanters. The king and the former king seemed dismayed, and everyone at the council began questioning them aggressively. Gordon held his head in his hands. observing the chaos unfolding before him. He had opposed punishing him with exile and had suggested granting him a Viscount title instead. He understood that this wouldn't just end with him and his father. The public would soon uncover the lie that the non-land family and the royal family had desperately tried to conceal. Sacred Flame and Alec arrived at Non-Land's residence to meet Esther. They all introduced themselves to him and Will informed him of Jink's whereabouts. Esther started crying at the confirmation that his brother was doing fine. Esther brought them to meet Elsa. Elsa was very relieved to hear about him too. Will told them about Jink being an enchanter too. Esther realized why Jink had asked for his blood when he saw the gift sent by Jink. Elsa said that she did not notice Jink's enchanting abilities at all, while she took care of him. She understood why Jink hid this from everyone all that time. If that had gotten out, this country would have definitely tried to steal his freedom. Will was certain because he had only heard bad things about Rosalta in recent years, and the poisoning incident involving the Chancellor's family had sparked it all. That incident had only occurred because the Chancellor's daughter had Jink, with his father being the king. Esther's eyes widened at the revelation. Will realized that he had said more than necessary, and Karen hit him for not being careful in front of Esther. Esther seemed horrified after discovering that he and Jink were not blood-related. Elsa comforted him and continued the story from where Will had left off. Previous king of Rosalta had gotten the crown with the support of the Chancellor. Shortly after, the Chancellor's daughter became pregnant with his child. If this secret had gotten out, it would have made the king's position worse. So he tried hard to keep it hidden. He had ways to handle it, but dealing with the Chancellor's daughter, who was influential, was tricky. Eventually, the pregnant lady carrying Jink was sent to House Non-Land, which was powerful, to marry Lord Gordon. Elsa, who used to work as a servant at the Chancellor's house, was sent with her. However, the former head of House Non-Land, Lord Noble Non-Land, didn't like this arrangement. He didn't want to pass on his family's legacy to a child who wasn't related to him, so he poisoned the food at one of the Chancellor's family gatherings. Jink didn't attend the party because he wanted to practice his spearmanship, and Elsa stayed with him. Everyone at the party, including Jink's mother and her family, met their end. Even Elsa's husband and son, who were serving at the party, were affected. Elsa was silenced by Noble and Gordon. She felt guilty for allowing Jink to be exiled just to save herself. Esther comforted her, saying she hadn't done anything wrong. The Non-Land family simply wanted to get rid of Jink, talented or not. Will told them that the capital was filled with criticism for the royal family. He also mentioned the Crown Prince's foolish behavior at the recent meeting. Chaos reigned in the royal palace. Will paid off a noble who was at the meeting to get this information. Rosalta was in deep trouble. After learning about the situation, Alec decided to move his group to Qual. Will asked Esther what he wanted to do. Esther replied that he didn't feel attached to the country or his family anymore. He demanded Karen, the leader of Sacred Flame, to take him in as her slave. He feared his family would be convicted and he'd be enslaved along with them. So he wanted to become Karen's slave and leave with Sacred Flame to meet up with Jink later. Elsa also insisted on becoming a slave with Esther. Outside the door, the rude butler listened to everything. He decided to grab some expensive stuff and leave the place because he thought the house was finished anyway. Karen dressed up Esther in a maid suit. Esther was extremely shy and embarrassed wearing that, but Karen had fun. She justified it by saying that Esther was a high-ranked noble successor, so he was pretty well known. It would have been impossible to make it through the inspection if he didn't disguise himself. Esther still didn't understand why he had to cross-dress. Even Elsa teased him about it. They all left for the Qual Kingdom right away. Esther still felt uneasy knowing that Jink was not his blood-related brother. Jink, Nina, and Ian arrived at Gamel. The city was bustling with people just as they expected. They gazed at the large entrance to the dungeon. Ian told them that in ancient times, the entrance used to be nothing more than a huge hole leading into the dungeon. As more adventurers began to arrive, the city started to grow. Jink noticed that Ian seemed quite knowledgeable about Gamel. Ian explained that his family had a shop branch here, so he had visited often with his father. His family mainly traded with mid-sized clans. Clans were essentially groups of adventurers. Small clans had just a few parties, while big clans could have several hundred members. Being part of a clan provided a safe base for adventurers to operate from, so most adventurers in Gamel belonged to one. Some clans even used their strength as a shield to get what they wanted, which made them intimidating trading partners for merchants. They decided to head to the guild first to gather some information. The guild was massive, feeling like one of those modern malls to Jink. As he was about to speak to the receptionist, a large drunken man interrupted him. He made fun of Jink and Nina, suggesting they hire guards if they didn't want trouble. The receptionist managed to get rid of him and apologized to Jink. Jink handed her his guild card, and she screamed when she saw his S rank. Everyone around was surprised. Some even thought about recruiting him to their group. Jink explained that his rank was because of his rare ability, but he still lacked experience. He was sent straight to the 5th floor, a place where many adventurers hadn't reached. While Jink and his team waited in the reception area, a girl named Mona showed up. She informed them that she would be their guide from now on. The guild provided personal assistance to adventurers based on their rank and skills. They could go to her for any help or advice they needed. Jink understood why other adventurers might be jealous of him. He greeted the dungeon guide and dove straight into business, asking about the necessary equipment and any important dungeon details. The guide explained that monsters would continuously appear, but the remains of those Jink defeated would vanish, leaving only a few items behind. These defeated monsters would eventually respawn. The items left behind, like magic stones or body parts, were called item drops, and they could also be found in treasure boxes scattered throughout the dungeon. Jink thought the dungeon seemed very organized, almost as if someone intentionally designed it that way. Mona advised him not to overdo things, warning that monsters got stronger the deeper he went. She mentioned that no one had made it to the deepest floors yet. Previous adventurers had said that the environment changed a lot from floor to floor. If one floor was hot, the next might be freezing cold, so he needed equipment for both hot and cold temperatures. Above all, quality footwear was necessary. She suggested he visit their guild store for the items he needed. After going over the basics, she informed Jink about a request the guild had for him. They needed him to gather magic stones. Due to a recent war, Qual was running low on magic stones, but not many adventurers were actively seeking them out. In this world, people used magic stones like batteries. They used the magic inside them to start fires and make water for everyday needs. Magic stones were super important for daily life, but low-ranked adventurers were too busy trying to survive, and the high-ranked ones didn't explore the lower levels because they were only interested in rare stuff. That's why Jink's group got the job. They were going to hunt slimes because they dropped magic stones. They went into the dungeon and found a big open space. After a bit, slimes started popping up from everywhere. Jink told Nina and Ian what to do to fight them. Nina struggled at first, so Jink had to help her, but she got the hang of it and managed to take down a bunch. Ian used his sword and wind magic to get rid of them too. When the slimes disappeared, they were left with a bunch of magic stones around them. Ian mentioned he wasn't even tired after the fight, all thanks to some enchantment. Jink explained that when you fought tough battles, your experience points went up in real time. He figured it was because the monster's energy turned into experience points. When he checked their stats, they had gone up a lot. They decided to challenge monster rooms to level up. According to the map, there were slime rooms on the 3rd floor, but only those above B rank were allowed there. Monster rooms were filled with specific kinds of monsters. Once you entered, you had to either survive for a set time or defeat all monsters before leaving. Jink told them that based on their enchantment, they were easily B rank, so they decided to go there. They reached the slime room on the 3rd floor. Hundreds of slime monsters came from all sides, more than they expected. Jink was confident that Ian could handle them, but he wasn't sure about Nina. When Nina got into trouble, he unleashed a massive water cyclone at them. The attack took out all the slimes at once. Jink had run out of mana after using the water cyclone attack, so he drank a mana potion to recharge. Nina felt sorry for the oversight and apologized to Jink. He reassured her, saying it was okay, and mentioned that both Nina and Ian's XP had increased due to his attack. It seemed that just being near the person who makes the shot could boost one's stats. Ian suggested it might be better for them to earn XP individually, so they continued battling slime monsters they encountered throughout the night. During the fights, Nina learned some shielding skills. Despite fighting numerous slimes, they didn't accumulate enough XP. They decided to move to another floor. Nina expressed her reluctance to enter a goblin room because she disliked their smell. Jink agreed, adding that goblins didn't drop good items either. The other options were kobolds on floor 9 and orcs on floor 15. They decided to go to the kobolds room because they had good item drops, and their smell was also slightly better than goblins. Orcs had thick skin, so their weapons wouldn't last against them. That's why kobolds were the best choice. Nina felt happy experiencing all the things adventurers did. They headed to the kobold's room on floor 9. There was a magic circle there, which was like a kobold's respawn point. After a few moments, kobolds started emerging from the circle. Ian and Jink started fighting them one by one. Nina also managed to defeat one after some effort. Jink built a tall water wall around them, keeping all the kobolds trapped outside. They decided to take a break inside the wall, grabbing loot and weapons as they went. Ian suggested they use magic instead of constantly moving around. Nina couldn't use magic, but Jink could enchant a weapon for her. Nina was thrilled at the idea of using magic. Jink pointed out that Nina didn't have enough mana for magic. Ian said she could manage with potions, though it might cost a bit. Jink agreed and gave Nina an enchanted weapon that could only cast water balls. When Jink took down the water wall, the kobolds flooded in to attack. Nina kept hurling water balls and drinking mana potions. Jink put up another water wall after a while. After drinking many mana potions, Nina couldn't hold it anymore. Jink enchanted a box for her to pee in. Nina was embarrassed at first, but eventually found a spot to relieve herself. After 3 days, they finished off many orcs in the orc room on floor 15. Ian mentioned that he had gotten over his fear of orcs by then. Meanwhile, Nina was excited about cooking orc meat later. After 3 days of continuous fighting, Ian and Nina's stats had increased greatly. Jink announced that they would head back topside after conquering the next room. The next room contained an orc general. They planned that Nina would attack with spells from behind, while Jink and Ian would charge head-on, casting their own spells. The orc general emerged out of the magic circle and tried to attack them. Jink went first and landed some hits on it, while Ian and Nina launched magic attacks from behind. Ian went after Jink and fought the monster with his sword, easily managed to bring the general down with their coordination and teamwork. After the orc general was defeated, Nina collected its meat to cook later. She then noticed a jiggly round thing with a weird smell. As a merchant's son, Ian knew what it was and told Jink. Jink instructed Nina not to hold it since it was an orc testicle. Soon after, Nina cooked her special orc meat soup and served it to Ian and Jink when they were back at their camp. As they ate, an elf guy appeared, following the smell of the dish. The guy seemed to recognize Jink. The elf guy introduced himself as Luke, the master of the Elder 3 clan. He felt good to finally meet Jink, the enchanter he had heard so much about. Jink checked Luke's status and found out that he was an S rank just like him. However, Luke didn't have any special abilities. Jink assumed Luke must have been incredibly skilled to reach S rank without any rare abilities. Luke's archery score was exceptionally high. Ian told Jink that Elder 3 was the 3rd most influential clan in Gamel. Jink asked Luke why he was there when several people standing behind Luke approached Jink and started begging for food. Luke explained that his clan had run out of food, so they were making their way back up from the floor below. However, with all the monsters, it was taking them a lot of time. They might have starved before making it back to the top side. Luke offered to pay money, but Jink said he would like some information in return for the food. Luke agreed to the deal as long as the information wasn't confidential. Nina cooked the whole clan a good meal. Everyone praised her cooking after eating. Luke said that he never expected to eat anything other than jerky and bread there. Jink told him that he had bought a lot of ingredients and cooking items just in case. While they were eating, Luke explained the clan system to Jink. He told him about the 2 main clans in Gamel, the Depths of Purgatory and the Emissaries. Some folks referred to them as the Big 3, including the Elder Tree. But Elder Tree was much smaller compared to the other 2. Both clans used force to maintain their hierarchies. Those with fewer abilities were often used as cannon fodder in the maze, either ending up dead or insane. Joining these clans meant paying steep membership fees. Some couldn't afford them, so they left. However, leaving a clan was seen as treason here, and no other clan would accept them. That's why some people ended up in Elder Tree, which prized freedom above all else. Luke wanted to help as many people leaving clans as he could, but he knew the other 2 clans would come after him. Ian confirmed that the 2 big clans had a bad reputation among merchants too. Despite this, their names still carried weight, and many joined because of their fame, only to regret it later. Jink thanked Luke for the valuable information, and together they made it to the top side. Luke expressed his gratitude for the meal and hoped they would meet again. He warned Jink to be cautious because he'd heard that the 2 clans had their eyes on him. After Luke left, Jink asked Ian and Nina about their maze experience. Nina said she had fun, while Ian talked about how effective the experience had been. Ian told Jink that he could form a clan of his own if they brought in the staff from the estate. Jink mentioned his upcoming exams, so they needed to return to the capital. He instructed Nina and Ian to take a break. The next day, Jink presented his loot from the past 3 days at the guild. Mona felt nervous seeing the amount of bags because now she would have to count them all. She spotted an orc's genitalia in one bag and happily picked it up, knowing it could be sold at a high price since it was used as an ingredient in medicines. At that moment, a man appeared and greeted Jink. He introduced himself as Dan, the guildmaster. Dan praised Jink for clearing a boss room in 3 days. He said Jink could take his provisional B-rank exam now, with Dan as his opponent. It was a test of endurance. Jink had to withstand Dan's attacks for an hour. Dan wanted to see how someone who quickly rose through the ranks with rare skills could defend themselves. Jink thought the exam was a bit unfair for those who focused on offense. Mona assured him it was just a provisional exam and wouldn't change much. Dan interrupted, warning Jink not to be overconfident because he wouldn't hold back. The man teased Jink a bit more, and Jink started feeling annoyed by the man's behavior. Eventually, Jink and Dan moved to the Gamel Branch area to have the test once all the preparations were finished. Jink had enchanted every part of his outfit. Dan allowed him to use defensive spells and swords as long as he didn't actually hit him. Once the match began, Dan kept attacking Jink while Jink defended himself. Jink managed to endure 1 hour of constant attacks easily. Dan admitted that it was even tougher than Snow had warned him. Jink didn't even break a sweat during the whole thing. Dan also praised Jink for his accurate defense. Dan realized that Jink was quite intimidating during the match. Jink pretended to block Dan's attacks, but he was secretly targeting the same spot on Dan's sword repeatedly. If it had gone on much longer, Dan's sword could have broken. Eventually, Dan acknowledged his defeat. He invited Jink to the library later to talk about something. Mona had some less experienced adventurers count Jink's loot for her earlier. She told Jink about the huge amount he earned through that. Now they, along with Dan, sat in the library. Mona informed Jink that as a provisional B rank, he no longer needed an escort when traveling, although having some security was still a good idea. Dan disagreed, saying Jink could handle himself well enough. Jink then asked Dan about what he wanted to discuss. Dan explained Ash's situation. Although the guild had released him, his father still wanted to make amends, so he came to gamble. Dan requested Jink to talk to Ash and negotiate a deal with him. He suggested that Jink could sign with a merchant he knew since Ash needed to sell goods anyway. Dan felt sorry for the man as his eldest son ended up as a slave and his youngest son was causing trouble. He hoped Jink could lend a hand to help out. Jink's opinion of Dan instantly changed after hearing this. He had thought that Dan was a self-centered, rude man, but it turned out he was actually kind. Jink said he was going to deal with that matter anyway, so he would meet him. After a few days, Jink and Ian met Ian's father. His father apologized for Ash's rude behavior. Jink said he would let it slide if he promised to keep his son in check. Jink also received a personal business contract with him. With Ian's help, they worked out the details pretty quickly. After the meeting, Jink told Ian to spend the rest of the day with his family. Maid Mamisa and Angie welcomed Jink back to his house. They handed over a letter to him. Jink opened the letter and noted that it was from Chris. Chris wrote that there were 2 slaves named Elsa and Esther at the Brand's house and wanted to meet him. Jink was shocked when he read the names. Jink rushed to the Brand's residence. Chris told him that he used to be a prince. Jink's eyes nearly popped out of their sockets when he heard that. Chris explained that he wasn't the oldest son of the Nonland family, but rather the illegitimate child of the King of Rosalta. This revelation had just come out, so the royal palace was in chaos. Will, Karen, and Bogard also appeared in front of Jink. Jink was confused about what was happening. He asked them to take him to Elsa and Esther. They led him to a quiet room. Elsa and Esther, wearing worn-out clothes with tired eyes, bowed their heads when Jink entered. Jink became furious seeing their condition and demanded to know who had done this to them. Karen replied that they had asked for it themselves. Chris explained that they had to do it because he and his mother couldn't treat slaves the same way they treated other servants. The servants would have caused an outrage, so they only asked to give them the bare minimum to survive. This was their atonement and apology to Jink. Jink didn't understand why Elsa and Esther would want an apology from him, so Will explained everything to him. He told him about the reason he got exiled and why Elsa and Esther believed that they were partially responsible for that. They became slaves, so Jink could punish them. It was all too much for Jink to take in. He first apologized to Chris and the Sacred Flame for putting them through trouble. Karen said that it was all right. She got to see Esther as a maid. Jink walked over to Elsa and Esther and asked them to stand up. He said he didn't want to punish them. He was just glad to see them okay. They didn't respond, so Karen had to tell Esther to lift his head. They both immediately apologized to Jink once they looked up. Esther apologized for his family's actions toward Jink, and Elsa apologized for not being able to protect him. Jink quickly told them not to blame themselves because none of it was their fault. When Esther respectfully called him Lord Jink, it made him angry. He yelled at Esther to stop, and then hugged him tightly, assuring him that they were still brothers. Esther started crying in Jink's arms, and then Elsa and Esther were brought inside. They changed back into their usual clothes too. Jink thanked the Sacred Flame members for everything and promised to enchant some items for them in return. He assured Esther that he would take care of him until he came of age. Jink expressed that he wanted to free Esther right away, but wouldn't be able to leave him alone until things settled in Rosalta. Being associated with Karen's name was better for them, since she was an S-rank adventurer. Esther and Elsa still insisted on serving Jink, but Jink shut them up. Jink's status had started showing King Rosalta's illegitimate child too. Will told them that the king and the crown prince had fallen from grace, leaving the throne empty. The queen also filed for divorce, and her home country dissolved their alliance with Rosalta. It was only a matter of time before a war broke out in Rosalta. Back in Rosalta, the former head of the Nonland family was sentenced to death, and Gordon Nonland was thrown into jail. The crown prince found himself confined within the walls of his palace. He grumbled about the nobles as he sat there until his father, the king, entered the room. Upon seeing his father, the prince turned to him, only to be struck by the king's scepter the moment he spoke. The king cursed his son, blaming him for everything that had gone wrong. He continued to beat the prince until the young man drew his final breath. In that moment, the prince realized he had departed from the world. Despite his death, he harbored a deep grudge against Jink, directing all his resentment towards him. He muttered Jink's name several times before a massive magic circle materialized in Gamel's dungeon. Jink stayed in the capital for 2 weeks and took his exams at the academy. After finishing his exams, he decided to return to Gamel with Esther and his group. Esther warmly greeted Ian and Nina when they arrived. Esther was wearing the armor that Jink had given him. Considering Esther's abilities, Jink thought it would be a good idea to spend 3 days repeatedly battling the orcs near the door, so Esther could get more practice. Jink believed that by the end of those days, Esther would be ready to join them in attacking the next floor. Ian questioned whether it was wise for Esther to start hunting orcs so soon. Esther reassured him, explaining that he had experienced hunting monsters during his guard duties for House Notland, and he had also fought some low-level monsters on the journey to Qual. However, it pained him to remember that he had done all that in a maid outfit. Jink informed Esther that he had an aptitude for wind magic, so on top of spearcraft, he should also level up his magic and mana. Nina asked Jink if Esther would have to drink a lot of mana potions like her, and he said yes. Nina got excited, thinking about how she would not be the only one feeling humiliated for having to pee. They got ready to leave for Gamel. Jink ordered Anzie and Mimosa to take care of the house while they were gone. Elsa also appeared with them in a maid uniform. Jink had given Anzie and Mimosa enchanted weapons, so they claimed that they would just use those weapons if things got bad. At Gamel, Jink introduced Esther to Mona. He asked if anything had changed while he was gone. Mona's expression darkened, and she asked Jink if he knew about named monsters. Jink admitted he had only heard about them. Mona explained that it was very rare, but sometimes the souls of the dead took over monsters. These monsters were called named monsters. They kept their memories, were intelligent, and could talk. They even looked like they did when they were alive. She told him that the orc general they had defeated on the 15th floor had come back to life as a named monster. Jink wondered if the monster had gotten stronger now that it had human intelligence. Mona assured him that it was the opposite. It had actually become weaker. She guessed that the monster must have had troubles in its previous life. Predicting the orcs' attacks used to be simple, but now it was even easier. It would spot women and immediately chase after them. Many weaker parties managed to defeat it by using female members as bait. They even started calling it Dork, combining orc and dork. With the 15th floor getting easier, there were problems with long lines forming before the 16th floor. Low-level adventurers took too much time clearing the 16th floor, leading to congestion and arguments in the queues. Mona asked Jink to assist anyone they encountered. Jink reassured her that he could enchant his entire party with healing abilities. On the 15th floor of Gamel, Esther battled some orcs using magic. He cast an attack called Air Slicer, which took down most of them. Ian noticed Esther's progress and improvement in just a few days. Esther also felt pleased with his own growth and improvement. Jink admitted he had been a bit worried if Esther could do more than just thrust with a spear, but now he was even using slicing techniques. Nina wondered how Esther managed not to take breaks while constantly chugging potions. They took a short break before deciding to move on to the next floor. Esther's level had jumped from 23 to 57 in 3 days. Now, they only needed to defeat the orc general to advance. Jink insisted on taking the front line, even though the general was weakened, just to be cautious. He also suggested Nina stay in the back, as the monsters behaved strangely around women. The orc general appeared from a swirling magic circle chanting Jink's name. Jink checked its status and found out it was Elliot, the crown prince. Jink announced what it saw in its status. As the orc approached Jink, he said it must have been fate for them to meet like this. He declared he would handle it himself. He sent some fire attacks at it, but the orc didn't even get a scratch. Jink had expected him to use fire magic since he had recently learned it, but it seemed he wasn't very good at it yet. The orc noticed Esther and started shouting, "Woman, woman, woman!" Esther got angry and yelled that he was a man attacking the orc with his spear. Jink took advantage of the situation and attacked from behind. The creature spotted Jink and started chanting his name again. It aggressively launched attacks, but Jink dodged everything and ended it with a single blow to its head. Esther informed him that the crown prince had been dethroned as per Will's report, suggesting he was likely executed afterward. Jink commented that he'd heard souls with strong resentments were more likely to be reborn as monsters, implying Elliot must have held a grudge. Jink felt it was deserved. By possessing a monster in Gamel, Elliot's spirit would be trapped there forever. He would keep coming back, endlessly respawning, only to be defeated by adventurers for experience points and items. Jink and the others kept fighting more monsters along the way until they reached the 20th floor. This floor was the most popular within the dungeon, known as the Crystal Area. It was packed with various kinds of crystals and stones, and many adventurers were milling about. Jink mentioned that he wanted to earn some money, and from what he had heard, rough emeralds and diamonds could be found here. Nina and Esther eagerly offered to do some mining. Jink took out mining tools from his item box, and Ian suggested a specific spot for Esther to mine. Using his material appraisal skill, he could assess the geological features of minerals. Nina, Esther, and Ian dug at different spots. Nina and Esther were excited when they found emeralds. Jink found it amusing to see them having fun like that, considering they were just kids. Ian also enjoyed the digging, but his motivation was different. He was focused on selling the stones to make money. Meanwhile, Jink decided to create a golem using minerals. He had been practicing earth magic and wanted to use the golem for mining. He used mana to sustain it, but the golem couldn't last long without it. The guilds used to warn about many traps and dangers down below. That's why they'd sometimes use the golem to trick enemies. When Jink and the others heard noise nearby, the golem began mining while they investigated. Turns out it was the depths of Purgatory and the Emissaries, two lower-ranked clans having a spat. Jink thought it was pretty silly. Moving on to the 21st floor, it looked more like a sunny field than a dungeon. Jink mentioned the creatures called green calves living there. Their meat was a delicacy, even better than orc meat. Jink and Esther had it back when they were nobles, but finding it in big cities was hard, so it cost a lot. Just thinking about it made Nina hungry. Suddenly, Jink remembered Mona mentioning more casualties lately. Hoping they'd stay safe, they kept going. Nearby, some huge ants were feeding on human bodies. Shortly after, Jink hunted green calves relentlessly until he was satisfied with the amount of meat he had collected. Nina then took out her knife and prepared to cook the meat, and Esther offered to assist her. The group enjoyed their meal, finding the calves' meat even better than they had anticipated. As they observed numerous white cows and minotaurs in the area, Ian realized that it was teeming with bovine-type monsters. While white cow meat tasted similar to that of green calves, their milk was exceptionally delicious. Conversely, minotaur meat was unpalatable and primarily useful for crafting, as their axes were too heavy for humans to wield. At that moment, Jink noticed that Esther had leveled up his wind magic and suggested trying out the air tornado spell he had been practicing. Esther was blessed as he could now provide support to the group. However, Jink cautioned him not to expect too much, as air tornado's range was lower compared to cyclone. As Jink decided to continue their journey, they suddenly spotted something approaching. It was a weary adventurer carrying their unconscious partner. Jink inquired about their condition, and the man urged them to retreat as well. Wondering what was happening, Jink asked for an explanation. The adventurer revealed that they had stumbled upon an ant nest nearby and were unfortunate enough to encounter a swarm of ants. When questioned about their other companions, the adventurer feared they might have already become ant food. Jink admitted to never having fought ants before and offered to help heal them in exchange for more details. While Jink and Ian tended to the injured pair, one of them described the difficulty of battling a swarm of ants, who attacked with their front claws and sprayed acidic substances. Despite their sturdy shells, the ants were vulnerable to fire. Jink realized they were ill-equipped for such a fight, as they were still new to fire magic and primarily relied on water and wind magic, respectively. The adventurer elaborated that the ants fiercely protected their queen, requiring a significant number of sorcerers to overcome them. Only certain clans possessed the necessary magic, as the other adventurer regained consciousness and expressed gratitude for their help. They cautioned Jink and Ian against confronting the ants before departing from the area. Ian noticed Jink's worried expression and asked what was wrong. Jink told them to rush to the 24th floor while being careful. The whole group went around and suddenly found themselves in the middle of the area. Just as they tried checking their map, nearby cows suddenly sensed something and started running away, passing by Jink and the others. Jink heard some rumbling and wondered if there would be an earthquake. Nina, looking anxious, told Jink to look over the distance. 3 adventurers were being chased by a swarm of huge ants. The female mage tried to fend off the ants using fire magic. She managed to eliminate some ants, but some of them started attacking with acid by spewing it out. The acid hit the mage's arm, and her arm started melting. Watching them struggle despite using fire magic, Jink wondered if his group could do something against thousands of ants. Esther and Nina then asked what their action should be. Ian said that they could save themselves by leaving the others to their death. Esther and Nina were shocked by Ian's proposition. Jink agreed that running away was the best option. However, he knew the kids would feel guilty soon after. He instructed the others to scatter the ants using their spells and keep their mana going by drinking a lot of potions. Jink then led the others, fully responsible for his party members' safety as the leader. Just then, the 3 adventurers noticed them and suggested running away. Jink told them to run as they bought some time for them. The adventurers called him crazy, but soon recognized Jink as the famous enchanter. Jink exclaimed they would also run away if they found the right timing. The other adventurers then ran away as they thanked Jink for the support. Jink then used Water Cyclone to break the swarm's formation. Esther then followed up with his Air Tornado and Spear attacks. Ian also used his wind magic to scatter the ants, and Nina did the same using Water Ball. However, the ants kept swarming in, and Jink chugged down more potions down his throat. He realized they were not efficient since they couldn't use fire magic. Both he and Ian had huge mana pools, but the kids didn't have much. Jink then instructed Esther and Nina to go near him, and he used Water Wall to protect the two. He told them to drink some potions and heal up. Jink then looked around as he tried thinking what to do next. Hold out or go directly for the Ant Queen. He knew killing the huge ant at the back would make the swarm collapse. However, the Ant Queen was too far in the back. Suddenly, he noticed some ants that looked different, and based on his appraisal, they were ant generals. Jink then decided to take action by using some orc meat as bait, flung the meat randomly, and the ants got distracted. Seeing that the baiting tactic worked, Jink ran toward the nearby ant general and quickly beheaded it. The ants then started acting confused, and Jink realized they had a chance of winning. Jink called over Ian and asked him to scatter orc meat chunks using his wind magic. He also instructed Ian to take out the commanders with ranged spells if the swarm opened up. Esther and Nina were also ready, and Jink instructed them to support and protect Ian. Jink counted on them as he planned to get closer to the queen ant and kill it. He dropped chunks of orc meat, and Ian flung them around randomly using his wind magic. Esther and Nina also used their wind magic to kill off any incoming ants. Ian also used his katana to slice down the ants gunning for them. Meanwhile, Jink kept using Water Cyclone to clear out the way until he reached the queen ant. He broke into a cold sweat as the huge ant monster loomed over him like a 7-foot basketball player. The ant queen shrieked in anger. Jink clenched his teeth and sword as he prepared to fight her. Jink himself believed that even though the queen's skills weren't particularly strong, it was doubtful that his blade could inflict enough harm on her. When the queen tossed acid in an attempt to harm Jink, he swiftly dodged the attack. Responding with a fireball aimed at the queen's head, she screamed upon being hit. She turned her aggression towards Jink. As she continued her onslaught, Jink evaded her attacks, finding them crude and easily avoidable. However, he still grappled with how to effectively harm her. His limitation in speed posed a challenge. Suddenly, inspiration struck, and he remembered Dan's tactics. A large body couldn't maneuver swiftly within a small space. With this realization, Jink began striking at the queen's legs, aiming to break her joints and gain control of the situation. Suddenly, ants from the ant army began attacking with acid. Jink was surprised and exclaimed that they shouldn't mess with him. Then, a large number of these ants were blown away by an air cyclone. Ian held back his magic and shouted to the children to keep the ants away from Jink. everyone rushed into battle. Everyone felt tense because they had little time and mana and their potions were running out. Jink used magic attacks to defeat the Ant Queen. She tried to attack Jink again, but he dodged quickly. The Queen tried to approach Jink, but her legs started cracking and then completely fell apart. Jink realized the armor wouldn't help her anymore, fell to the ground defeated as Jink damaged all her joints. Meanwhile, the others held back the crowd of ants. Queen tried to attack Jink with acid, but he dodged and told her not to resist. He moved fast, delivering blows at the Queen until he broke the horns on her head. Jink hoped that if she lost consciousness and her legs, she wouldn't be able to do anything. The Ant Queen screamed as Jink rushed to attack her, successfully cutting her armor and herself into 2 parts, breathed her last breath, and died hurriedly. Seeing this, the army of ants panicked greatly while the others maintained defenses around her body. The ants began to disperse, and Nina remarked that it happened after the Queen was killed. Esther ran up to Jink and said his brother was doing well. Jink sighed, glad they weren't hurt, but realized if he had made even one mistake, they would have been lying in the maze. He apologized for being careless. Ian reassured Jink, saying he was glad they had survived. Esther said it was still a success, and they decided to use wind magic to pack up everything and return outside. Nina mentioned it would be difficult to calculate everything. Esther suggested that since Jink had defeated the A-rank Ant Queen, he would likely receive the temporary rank of A. Jink pondered on it, unsure because it all happened too fast. Days later, at the Gamble branch of the Adventurers Guild, Jink worried about getting a lecture for risking his life as an enchanter. Mona informed Jink that he helped B rank adventurers and rewarded him with 3 platinum coins, which Jink calculated as 300,000 Japanese yen. He asked if it was too much, but Mona said it was the market price for saving lives. She emphasized how important their help was and expressed her concern for Jink's safety. Jink thanked her, understanding the gravity of the situation. Mona left to inform the guild head, leaving Nina to remark on Mona's worry for Jink's safety. Jink felt reassured by Mona's concern. After that, Dan entered the room and spoke to Jink. He mentioned hearing about Jink defeating the ant swarm. Dan believes Jink had overestimated himself, putting his friends in danger while trying to help others. He questioned why Jink would risk his life and not return to Rosarda. Esther jumped up, questioning Dan's audacity to speak to his brother that way. Dan brushed off Esther's concerns, stating his position as guild head didn't matter. Jink intervened, acknowledging Dan's point and agreeing to be more cautious. Dan scoffed at the idea, suggesting Jink reflect on his actions. Dan then shared an important message with Jink. He revealed that the guild head from Corda had contacted him. Aristocrats from Rosarda had arrived unexpectedly, seeking assistance. Disguised as merchants, they sought an escort, intending to bring Jink back to Rosarda and make him king. Esther couldn't believe their audacity after banishing Jink. Jink questioned why Dan informed him, to which Dan explained that the guild prioritized legality and neutrality in international matters. Jink pondered informing the King of Qual about this development and inquired about the aristocrats' identities. Dan admitted they didn't know yet and asked for Jink's speculation. Jink realized that Marquis Tarnier, a notorious nobleman, might be involved. Dan reassured Jink that Tarnier didn't know about Jink being in Gamel and was searching for him elsewhere. This prompted Jink to consider reaching out to Chris and the Sacred Flame Party for help. Mona interrupted, expressing concerns about the recent ant encounter and its impact on the investigation. Jink assured her it didn't hinder their progress much, though they did halt mining during the commotion. Mona suggested filing a complaint with the clan heads, which Jink agreed to, noting the interference from the clans with guild affairs. As Dan expressed how troublesome it was, Jink wanted to inquire further, but Dan abruptly left, expressing frustration. The discussion then shifted to a middle-aged man in the midst of a heated rant about Jink's recent actions. He emphasized the seriousness of the situation, especially since it involved an S-rank clan. The group agreed that action needed to be taken, suggesting avoiding contact with Jink. Meanwhile, another meeting was underway. The guild had lodged complaints against their clan and the emissaries. They debated the importance of territories versus other concerns when one member revealed an order from the Kingdom of Nizar to eliminate Jink. The Depths of Purgatory was a big group of adventurers in the land of Gamel. Their leaders, who hailed from the nearby country of Nizar, sent scouts to the Kingdom of Kol. Their Their mission? To eliminate the enchanter. Queen Melissa faced a challenge getting her son-in-law to Nazar because Elliot had banished Jink. Dragging him there was tough, and leaving him unchecked posed a threat to their country. They had to act fast before he became even more dangerous. Failure meant certain death, so they needed volunteers. One of them volunteered to take action since he was familiar with the labyrinth's secrets. He knew enchanters were formidable foes. To fool Jink, he'd pose as a member of the emissaries. Even if he slipped up, Jink would think it was just an emissary's mistake. Any rift between them could harm the Kingdom of Coal. It was a risky plan, demanding caution. Days later, the usual group gathered again. Jink reported that their recent battles had boosted their skills. Ian's magic level surpassed 100 thanks to Jinka's enchanted items. Nina, now 13, wanted to be called Big Sister. They felt stronger after overcoming the ant-infested 26th floor. From there, it was smooth sailing, but they knew the real challenge lay ahead in the cold zone, starting on the 26th floor. Jink prepared by buying warm clothes, a new experience for him. Esther questioned the need for such gear as Rosarda and Corta had similar climates year-round. But Jink, recalling cold memories from his past in Japan, understood the necessity. This time, their priority wasn't mining or exploring for artifacts. It was survival. Together, they tackled monsters and pressed onward swiftly. They reached the 26th floor, where Jink, like everyone else, felt the sheer cold. He mentioned that Japan wasn't anywhere near this wintry. They knew that stopping could lead to frostbite, so they decided to block the wind and raise the temperature. Jink made an air barrier and advised the team not to exhaust themselves because breaks would be short in the dungeon with the boss. It was tough, but they needed to hurry. While they sheltered from the snowstorm, Ian suddenly spotted approaching snow tigers. Hungry monsters rushed to attack them. Jink used water arrows to injure them, and Ian finished them off with an air cutter. Ian noted that due to the weather, they probably couldn't eat the monsters. And hunting in the cold was tough. Jink's water arrow became a giant popsicle due to the weather. Nina asked what that meant, thinking they might not know about such sweets in this country. Suddenly, he had an idea Nina might like. After some time, they reached the 30th floor where the boss awaited in the dungeon. It took them 2 days to boost their physical strength. Jink wondered how adventurers managed it. Suddenly, Jink produced a pile of leftover metal from alchemy. Surprising the others, he used it to make a golem, which cleared snow into a barrel. Esther asked about it, and Jink said they'd find out later. Inside the boss's dungeon, Acrocanth, the boss dungeon, appeared. Jink warned everyone to be cautious as he could kill instantly with a bite. Defeating him was tough because direct blows were hard to land. They needed to dodge and attack with magic. As the monster tried to attack, Jink unleashed an air cyclone. Then he used a water tornado, considering blinding him with an arrow if it failed. Their combined magic worked, and the monster fell, coughing blood. It surprised Jink, but they won. He admitted he didn't have special skills, relying on his stats, but Esther mentioned how magic's power grows with level. As they got up, Jink mentioned a safe zone ahead where they could rest. Many people were camped there, possibly from the emissaries or purgatory. Someone called out Jink's name, and Leon approached, reminding him that Jink once offered orc stew to them. Jink recognized him from the Elder Tree clan. Leon suggested going somewhere a bit far from the other two clans. As they cooked, Jink offered milk from a white cow, and they agreed. The children drank it and fell asleep instantly, exhausted from the cold. Jink asked how many lions there were. The guy explained they were the 3rd squad supply, not able to leave easily as they supported the 1st and 2nd squads and communicated with the surface. 3 other squads from different clans also provided support on lower floors. Jink thought that sometimes they stayed there for up to a month. He guessed they smelled bad. Leon said he got what Jink was thinking. He said there was nothing to do because drinking water was really important, so they couldn't use it to wash. Jink suggested trading some water for information about the lower floors, from the 31st to the 35th floor, where there's a tropical jungle zone. According to Leon, many adventurers get stuck in the cold zone now. Even the guilds need to learn more about what's happening. They say it's because one clan wants to sell information about this area. Jink thought that if they made a map and a guide to the jungle territories, they could make money. He handed over the water and thanked Leon. The guy wished Jink good luck. At that moment, someone was watching Jink and the others go to the 31st floor. Jink's party soon came across a jungle. It was different from the cold zone. It was hot and humid. Their goal was to explore the area, gather information, and make a map. If they sold this information to the guild, they could earn money. He didn't think it was hard and encouraged them to try. Nina said she would have been glad, but it was too hot. Jink agreed and took out a barrel of snow. From there, he pulled out a special white cow milk sherbet. The others asked what it was. He remembered Nina's words about wanting to know what sherbet was. He secretly prepared it in a safe area. Nina tried it and said it was very tasty. Ian liked it too. Jink said that for cooking, you need to add sugar to the milk and cool it. The milk is already rich, so cream isn't needed. Ian said the guy could sell such a unique dish. Jink said it's a common food in that world. Esther asked about it, but Jink said he read about it in the library. He also figured out how to cool them down. You need to wrap a frozen slime jelly in cloth. If you put it in your pocket or on your head, it will cool down. Ian started thinking about how much it would cost. He was a real merchant, born and bred. They were about to leave, but they had to stick together. Everyone then explored the jungle. Suddenly, Ian stopped Jink. Two people were cursing in front of them. They were talking about the mission to kill Jink. The king and princess also wanted to kill him as soon as possible. Jink wondered if this was the former Queen Rosarda. Suddenly, he heard that the depths of purgatory people would always know Jink's location because of the guildmaster's intel. Jink then realized that Dan had ties with the depths of purgatory clan. Everyone regrouped as Jink didn't believe the entire clan were spies, but acknowledged that some might have followed them into the maze. Mina suggested Dan could be a traitor. Esther claimed they should not trust Dan anymore. Jink thought otherwise, since Dan gave him a warning and even helped with the issue with Ian's father. Esther exclaimed that Dan was just gaining his trust, but Jink wondered if that was the case. Ian then reminded them to be careful since they were being followed. Jink suggested rushing back to the guild and reporting. Dan's reaction should show the answer to their doubts. Jink cautioned them against letting the Purgatory clan know they were onto the assassination attempt. Jink knew Ian and Esther would be fine, but he worried for Nina. Nina knew she was being doubted because of her honesty, but she exclaimed that she would be fine. Upon returning, Mona was shocked to find Nazar's scouts were posing as the Purgatory clan members. Dan was also angered, and everyone watched closely his reaction. Jink questioned what they should do now that Nazar was involved. He suggested informing the state's king. Dan argued that it could lead to war. He emphasized that beyond spies, other reasons could lead to eliminating them. Despite previously claiming neutrality, Dan believed the matter should be left to the state, with them aiding and catching the killers. He volunteered to venture into the maze with them, asserting they needed more to defeat the clan and catch them in the act, with Dan as a witness. Jink suspected Dan's motives, but saw it as an opportunity to distance Dan from the guild. He agreed to accompany Dan. Esther then asked if he truly didn't know anything, which Dan confirmed. He knew he was not trustworthy for now, but he wanted to prove something. They agreed to leave the next day. Dan went outside and reminisced about his brother joining the depths of purgatory and inviting him. Meanwhile, Jink finished his letter to the king and retrieved truth serum from the drawer, a family medicine from the non-land family, taking some with him before his exile. He never thought that he would use it. As a former noble, he should not worry about his conscience as Jinkura was getting in the way. However, he must do what he can to protect everyone. The following day, everyone gathered, with Dan's help enabling them to navigate through the maze. Disguised in rags, Dan received a bracelet enchanted with physical strength. Ian questioned if it was wise, considering it would increase Dan's level. Jink insisted they needed to proceed together, but they needed to keep a close eye on Dan. As they ascended to the 15th floor, Dan grew weary by the 14th, questioning if the group always moved at such a pace. They recalled Dan's words that he would keep up. Dan requested a break, happily enjoying the food, and complimented Nina's cooking. Suddenly, Jink asked Dan if he liked betting. Dan claimed his wife made him quit. Jink explained straightforwardly that it was a truth serum from the non-land family meant to be used on the Purgatory clan members. He handed the bottle to Dan, sitting on the ground, and explained that it needed to be mixed with water. He claimed that they'd have a drinking challenge. Ian and Esther protested. Jink insisted they would all talk until they drank it, mentioning the side effects like anxiety and mental trauma. Despite Esther's attempt to stop them, Jink was determined to experiment, ensuring the right dosage. He mentioned they had an antidote if anything went wrong, adding that it was his first time trying it. He wagered a platinum coin and shared meals if Dan won, emphasizing his authority as the guild leader. Dan finally grasped Jink's intentions and asked if he truly believed he was involved in something beyond the guild's knowledge. Jink affirmed, willing to take the risk. After Dan agreed, he warned Jink not to underestimate him, confident he could handle anything. As everyone watched, Jink drank from the cup, his eyes widening at the unpleasant voices he heard. He hastily put the cup down, clearing his throat. The guild leader, observing, followed suit, experiencing discomfort and groaning. Despite this, Jink continued drinking while Dan began feeling unwell, eventually standing in a muddy pool of water. Suddenly, the water surrounded Dan's legs, and he heard a voice addressing him as a brother, questioning why he hadn't intervened. The voice blamed him for death, and a haunting face appeared reminiscent of his smiling brother. Dan regretted not stopping him, realizing his brother's enthusiasm for the dangerous expedition. Later, he learned his brother had died exploring the treacherous maze, a fate not uncommon for those part of the Purgatory clan. Jink's conviction convinced him otherwise, dispelling any notion that it was mere rumor. Dan believed that the people from Nazar had acted cruelly. He watched as those released from confinement formed a large clan, feeling powerless to intervene. Even after assuming leadership of the guild, he struggled to address the issue. He couldn't treat those released from prison and aristocrats the same as before. Dan pondered how many lives had been lost because of him, realizing he could have saved them by setting aside his pride. Thanks to Jink, he stumbled upon information about crimes related to the depths of Purgatory. Determined not to flee this time, he resolved to protect Jink and his friends. As Dan regained consciousness, Jink and his friends watched him. He inquired if he had truly lost consciousness, and if he had done anything foolish under the serum's influence. Bowing his head, Jink apologized to Dan, admitting his foolish actions. Esther also apologized. Dan reassured them, taking responsibility for withholding information about those released from the Purgatory. Ian debunked the theory of collusion between Dan and those from the Purgatory clan, wondering who could betray the guild leader like that. Dan denied involvement, but soon suspected someone with prior ties to those from the Purgatory clan. Dan recounted an incident 5 years ago when one of them passed a rank promotion test, leaving him with a significant scar. The man vividly remembered the individual's unsettling grin. Jink insisted they had no choice but to find the killer and uncover the truth. Recalling the gift of empathy, a rare ability allowing interaction with an opponent's thoughts and feelings, they realized its potential importance in intel gathering. Meanwhile, in a jungle area, a man writhed in pain, clutching his head and demanding relief. His companions complained about his behavior. Confused, they questioned if anyone had discovered their use of empathy. The man in the hood admitted ignorance, prompting speculation that the guild leader had been mentally attacked. Concern arose over the possibility of their plan to eliminate Jink being exposed, prompting urgent action to gather all assassins in the maze for the task. The hooded man demanded that the tousled-haired mercenary calm their partner down. The mercenary said it was difficult to do so. The hooded man spoke negatively about the situation and wondered how Jink's squad could attack them mentally. Suddenly, the three mercenaries heard loud noises. They looked up and saw wyverns flying towards them. The hooded mercenary pointed to their partner and said that he should be left since they had no other choice. A mercenary with tousled hair asked if they would just leave one of them. He claimed that the crying man had an important gift of empathy. The hooded mercenary raised his voice and said that the man would have been dealt with by the opponents anyway. He asked if a man was willing to take risks for one person. The mercenaries with tousled hair swore and then decided to leave him anyway. Finally, the man with empathy continued to sit on the ground and cry. At that moment, a wyvern flew up to him and grabbed him with its mouth. All the other mercenaries fled, hoping to hide somewhere from the monster. The hooded mercenary was swearing and speaking negatively about Jink. He swore that he would capture him. At that moment, Jink sneezed, saying it was very cold on the 26th floor. He suggested that they would go as always. Dan shivered and said he was very cold and demanded that Jink summon the monster as soon as possible. Jink rubbed his chin and asked what he meant. Dan asked if he really didn't understand. Dan explained that while traveling through cold zones, you can summon a monster that is resistant to cold and able to pull a sled. Dan believed that the most reasonable idea would be to summon a fire monster like a salamander. Jink said that it was not written in the instructions. He claimed that they didn't have someone who could summon a monster. Dan asked how, in that case, Jink and his squad passed this floor last time. Jink said he would make an air curtain first. He said they needed to take lanterns for heating. Jink held up his index finger and said that their physical strength and fire would handle the rest. Dan asked if he was serious. He thought that Jink said and did all this on purpose. Jink used fire magic and a flame lit up in his hand. Dan said that recently, the level of his fire magic had increased. Jink did various manipulations with fire and then said that it was not so difficult to create heat inside the air curtain. Dan adjusted his mask and said that since there was no other choice, that's all they had to do. Jink said that everything was fine. He wondered if Dan had improved compared to yesterday. He said to focus on maintaining the magic, and Dan would have to look around on the 30th floor. The team soon met with the dungeon boss. At one point, the monster took heavy damage and collapsed motionless. Dan grinned, saying that the boss monster was an easy foe to defeat. Jink suggested taking a break to discuss further strategy. Dan turned around, questioning why they didn't head straight to the safe zone. He wasn't worried about external threats, but found the local smell unpleasant. Jink explained that the monster would respawn in an hour. He believed it was worth defeating it earlier for extra experience points and loot. Dan understood Jink's strategy and the team's plan. Later, Nina offered White Cow's milk and sherbet. Esther offered Dan his portion, indicating he could have it if he wanted. Dan could feel that Esther still felt bad from what happened a while ago and refused the offer since nutrition is important for Esther's growth. Dan inquired about their squad's plan. Jink explained they would pretend to explore the tropical floor to lure enemies out. Jink had scouted the area previously, considering its advantages and disadvantages. Jink mentioned the poor visibility due to the overgrown trees, but noted it also hindered enemy sight. They discussed improving their radar skills for an advantage. Dan acknowledged the guild might need to learn more about the area. He recognized the strengths of the Perdigates in surveillance and intelligence. Jink saw their situation as a test of both mental and physical strength. They decided to head to a safe zone, intending to act covertly. As they passed other dungeon participants, including mercenaries, all eyes were on them. On the tropical floor, Jink and the others decided to take a brief break. Dan was surprised they could set up a bath and other amenities in the safe zone to avoid getting dirty. They speculated whether the people from the Purgatory clan would attack, but remained vigilant. Jink, feeling less like himself after a week of focus, relied on his heightened perception skills. The others guarded the defenseless Jink as he sensed 4 enemies blocking the passage to the safe zone. They hadn't encountered these foes on the tropical floor before. Jink claimed that someone from the depths of Purgatory was following them. Jink was confident they were still up for the task, and the attack plan was still on. Dan suggested their conversations might be overheard outside of detention. Jink said they needed the skill of hearing for this, failed to realize that Jink's squad knew about the surveillance. He noticed the mercenaries were not in a hurry. Jink suggested they say negative things about Nazar to test the theory. Dan chuckled and agreed it was a good idea. After checking again, Jink and his squad found out the mercenaries were watching them with their eyes, not their ears. Soon after, Jink widened his eyes and looked away suddenly. Nina approached him and asked what happened. Jink replied that the mercenaries from depths of Purgatory raised their killing intent. Jink became more determined and said they would stick to his plan. He claimed the mercenaries kept their distance and kept an eye on them. Jink thought they could outsmart them. He suggested that he and Nina could use themselves as bait. The others told Jink they were pretending to be in love. He believed it would help catch the mercenaries. Esther asked if it was dangerous. Jink said if they all hid in the shelter, they would be safe. He claimed if Nina leveled up, she would become stronger than Dan. Dan reluctantly admitted it was true. He said it was because of his enchantment. Jink explained their squad's strategy. He urged his brother Esther to act faster. Esther obeyed and pretended to practice water magic by pouring water. Jink decided to use a poison developed by the non-land family. It was a gas that reduced thinking abilities when vaporized. The squad had all taken the antidote beforehand. Esther told Jink they would go ahead. Jink agreed and said he and Nina would cook a meal. He realized the substance they used had a slight odor, so Nina had to cook to get rid of it. They decided to spread the smell of food with wind magic. Jink understood they just had to wait for the mercenaries to show up. Jink soon noticed something strange in Nina's behavior and asked her about it. Nina said she was scared because people from the depths of Purgatory were trying to kill them. She wasn't prepared to do something beyond her principles to protect the Jink. Jink realized fighting a monster and a human were perceived differently. Jink was fine with killing in blood, but Nina was a simple village girl. Smiling, Jink stated their current goal was to capture the mercenaries alive. He insisted Nina could leave the battle to him and advised her to just defend herself. Nina thanked Jink and promised to do her best. Jink smiled, saying it was time to act. He suggested they wait a while. Blushing, Nina handed a spoonful of food to Jink, asking him to try it. After tasting it, Jink hugged Nina and complimented her cooking. He joked about marrying a girl like Nina, who pretended to be embarrassed. The rest of the squad watched their interaction, laughing. Dan asked what they were doing. Ian then claimed he was using perception and confirmed that the act was working. He implied the people from the depths of purgatory couldn't enjoy good food or hygiene like Jink and Nina. He speculated that the depths of purgatory mercenaries had been enduring bad food in isolation for days, perhaps without seeing women for a long time too. He noticed the mercenaries observing Jink and warned that they were approaching with anger, hunger, and envy. Esther could see the mercenaries were walking toward the poison he spread beforehand. He claimed it was over for them. Dan felt bad for the mercenaries falling for a dirty plan, but still believed that they deserved it. Nina noticed sauce on Jink's face and wiped it with a handkerchief. Jink informed her that the mercenaries were very close. Ian rose from hiding and proposed attacking them from the rear. Dan ordered the squad to move forward. As the mercenaries approached, they noticed Jink. The mercenary with the eye patch warned Jink to stop showing off, threatening to take his food and the woman from him. The mercenaries from depths of purgatory surrounded Jink and Nina. They said it was the end for Jink. In response, Jink and Nina got into a fighting stance. The mercenaries laughed and were happy they'd finally deal with Jink. One of them was relieved they'd soon leave the jungle. Jink put on the enchanted accessories, thinking Esther and the others hadn't noticed the mercenaries yet. One of the mercenaries pointed at Nina, demanding the others not touch her as she could still be useful. Another guy eyed Jink and remarked on his looks, already making creepy plans. But then he got startled, as if realizing something. At that moment, he thought the mercenaries had gone mad from poison. All the mercenaries rushed forward to attack Nina and Jink. Jink shielded the girl and struck out, stabbing one of the mercenaries. He felt it might be too late to fix anything. Suddenly, another mercenary appeared behind him, swinging a sword. Jink turned swiftly, blocking the attack. He conjured a magic fireball and hurled it at the mercenary. Meanwhile, another mercenary approached Jink, ready to strike, but Nina intervened, leaping to attack him. She hit the mercenary in the leg, making him scream in pain. Nina had been determined to strike again when suddenly she was grabbed from behind, causing her to scream. Jink turned around and cried out in alarm as he witnessed one of the mercenaries immobilize Nina. The mercenary approached Nina's face, demanding that she not resist and insisting that she should blame everything on Jink. He even threatened to have some fun before dealing with her. Jink had already moved towards the mercenary to push him off Nina, but Nina, with a menacing look, shouted at Jink not to worry about her. She then hit the man, causing him to scream in pain and pushed him off her, expressing her disgust at his smell. Another mercenary appeared behind Nina, about to stab her with a sword. Nina quickly turned and launched a water balloon at the man, grabbed him by the hair and knocked him in the face. She shouted at the mercenaries not to come near her. Jink looked at Nina, amazed at how she could scare him so much. A mercenary with an eye patch screamed that Jink and Nina were just two children, unaware of the guy behind him who struck him right on the head. At that moment, Dan and Esther burst out of the bushes. Dan yelled to the mercenaries, warning them of an imminent attack. The mercenaries were surprised to see that Jink and Mina had backup all along. The Jink squad quickly surrounded the mercenaries. Esther skillfully struck with his spear, taking down several opponents at once while Dan fought with his swords. The mercenaries fell to the ground, screaming in pain. Dan grinned and felt elated, noticing how agile his body had become thanks to Jink's help. After some time, their opponents were defeated. Jink's partner approached him, asking if he was okay. Jink reassured them that he was fine and suggested reviving the surviving mercenaries. However, Nina refused, stating she didn't want to touch them. Jink insisted they could handle everything themselves. The living mercenaries were bound and lined up. Jink fixed his gaze on them, his expression fierce. He announced it was time to interrogate them, stating he had many questions. Jink promised that if they answered truthfully, they would face fewer consequences. He emphasized that it wouldn't be a problem since he didn't want to lay hands on them. Jink approached the blindfolded mercenary and told him he needed to drink the truth serum to make things easier for everyone. The man spat out the serum, causing Jink to glare at him while the mercenary just smiled and spoke ill of Jink. Suddenly, Esther rushed up to the mercenary and drove her spear into his knee, causing him to scream in pain. Esther remarked that the mercenary was silent, then asked her brother what they should do with him. He suggested they could start by tearing off his fingers one by one. Esther drove the spear deeper into the man's knee, stating that if they wanted him to talk, they could only spare his tongue. The other mercenaries looked on with disapproval at Esther's actions toward their leader, screaming at them not to continue. The man revealed that the mercenaries were trained from childhood to torture, specifically to inflict maximum pain without killing too quickly. Jink glared at the leader of the mercenaries, demanding answers about their numbers. But the mercenary stayed silent. Turning away, Jink approached the other mercenaries, confidently stating there was nothing they could do. He grabbed one of their heads, causing the mercenary to scream in fear. Despite the mercenaries' pleas, Jink revealed his ability to manipulate fire magic, threatening to increase the heat gradually. The mercenary begged for release, realizing the danger as Jink explained how the thin skin meant the skull would soon heat up. Jink's words instilled terror, suggesting the possibility of severe burns. He warned of the potential for death from pain shock and asserted there were various ways to handle it. Looking at the other mercenaries, Jink likened them to the monsters they hunted, seeing no difference in their worth. The mercenary whose head was under Jink's hand shouted for him to let him go as the man was ready to tell everything Jink released as the man and gives him the floor. The guy looks at his hand and wonders if it was a Jink, would he have done the same? He decides that it's better for Nina not to see it. One of the mercenaries swears and shouts at Jink so that he doesn't think he can get rid of them easily. He says that the exit from the maze is guarded outside the prison. He claimed that the guy and his squad couldn't escape. Dan asks about the exit from the maze. He decides to tell the mercenaries everything. Since they didn't know, Dan says that the mercenaries have become traitors to the guild. He claims that the ambassadors of the exit from the labyrinth will judge them, and he assures them that their clan will be destroyed. Dan says that all the mercenaries will be tortured and then executed at best. They could have been enslaved. Dan examines them and says he will be a witness in court. He says they should all keep quiet if they don't want to make the situation worse. As a result, their interrogation continued. Jink suggested that the mercenaries lacked the spirit and courage to take action for the good of the Nizar country. Consequently, Jink's squad discovered they were no longer in custody. This clan was formed by Nizar to scout and steal from a stake. It turned out the merchant they targeted was also a scout. To weaken the power of the stake, they were advised to recruit skilled adventurers to their cause. However, things took a turn for the worse after completing their tasks. It was far worse than Jink had anticipated. One of the mercenaries was taken aback when he asked him about the gift of empathy. He revealed that with his assistance, they gathered information about the guild from Dan's mind. As they delved into his thoughts, Dan became tense. The mercenary remarked ironically that Dan unwittingly provided them with information about the guild and its plans. The mercenary mentioned that due to Dan's mental assault, one of their comrades went insane and had to be left behind. Jink thought about the mental assault that occurred when one of the mercenaries entered Dan's mind. He wondered if the mercenary could have somehow overloaded himself mentally. Jink recalled how he and Dan had consumed the truth serum. He suggested that it might have affected the mental assault. Dan approached the man and inquired whether one of the mercenaries had truly suffered because of it. The man responded that it doesn't matter anymore. Jink asked Dan what was happening, noticing Dan clenching his hand into a fist. Meanwhile, voices echoed from another floor, where the cloaked squad battled monsters attempting to attack them. The man remarked that 2 hours would pass in 10 seconds. The entire squad assumed fighting stances, ready for another challenge. A wyvern emerged, and the squad employed magic to defeat it swiftly. As the monster fell, the squad leader grinned, pondering whether the members of the second squad had truly been apprehended. Unfazed by the unknown, the leader possessed the gift of divination and remained unafraid of the enchanter. Stone golems carried cages containing mercenaries from outside the prison. Dan walked alongside Jink and remarked that he had finally grasped how the guy intended to utilize the golems. Jink decided to create 2 separate prison areas, each to be carried by the golems, to segregate those who confessed immediately and those who resisted. One cage was furnished with a soft blanket, while the other contained thorns. The food allocation included both smelly meat and delicious smoked meat. Additionally, the squad added a medicine from the non-land family to the drinks to prevent dizziness. This way, Jink aimed to provoke envy among those in better conditions. The team faced turmoil as the mercenaries began to swear. Ian smiled and commended Jink for his meticulous planning. Jink observed that their squad comprised mostly of lower-ranking members and asserted that without his arrangements, they might have encountered difficulties. Jink had even considered the issue of restroom facilities. Although challenging, he provided them with underwear equipped with storage, which he dubbed diapers of another dimension. However, the odor became unpleasant, prompting them to employ an air curtain, which proved to be quite troublesome. Esther pointed out that his brother was special, but he insisted he couldn't come up with something like that. Jink mentioned that without a lot of mana, it was impossible to do this. He reminded the squad that they still needed to support the golems. Esther approached her brother and suggested he learn from him how to deal with bad people. Dan waved his hand, dismissing the idea as not worth learning. Jink agreed with him. Suddenly, Ian felt something and turned to Jink, who immediately replied that he also felt something strange. He warned that a large group of people with a strong desire to kill was approaching them, knowing it was the first squad. Dan looked at Jink and asked about their strategy this time, wondering what he should do. Jink listened to the prisoners and concluded that the most problematic in the first squad were the leaders Forbes and Neville. He insisted they must defeat these two mercenaries. They mentioned that Neville's strength was more suitable for the second squad, but he had the ability to appraise. Jink also added that they shouldn't worry, since Neville could only use his ability if they were in his field of vision. He suggested they defeat him before he found out their stats. Then Jink briefed about the leader of the first squad, Forbes. He explained that Forbes could spend all his mana in a few seconds, but could foresee the future. He emphasized that by using prediction, Forbes could reach the S rank. Jink suggested they take advantage of the abilities of the first squad to attack from afar, deciding to use water magic to the fullest. He assigned Esther and Nina to go ahead of the prison and support it with magic. Jink proposed they attack the enemy with his magic, aiming to defeat the magician quickly and prevent their remote attack. He handed out enchanted glasses for evaluation, explaining that the squad needed to wear them to learn the names and skills of the opponents. The first group marched through the thickets of the rainforest. Forbes noticed Dan and started taunting him. He asked if the guild, which should have stayed away, really supported Enchanter. Dan replied that the second squad had informed him about everything. Jink warned that the first squad would be in trouble if they didn't surrender. He assured them that if they cooperated, their lives as slaves would be better than the others. Jink then cast a spell, and everyone waited anxiously for something terrible to happen. After a tense moment, Forbes smoothed his hair, hoping to escape the maze and peacefully. However, his tone turned more menacing as he declared it to be the end for him. Jink, with wide eyes, used water magic to unleash a huge wave onto the first squad. Many members were caught off guard and swept away by the wave. As the wave subsided, the first squad struggled to get back on their feet. Neville cursed as he tried to rise, but Jink swiftly incapacitated him with an air cutter. Angry shouts erupted from the first squad towards Jink. Forbes wiped his face, admitting he could have foreseen it, but the attack had been sudden. He raised his sword, ordering the first squad to attack Jink and his companions. Forbes screamed that their goals were the guild leader's head and the children. Dan and Ian charged forward, engaging in combat. Jink shouted Forbes' name and swung his sword at him. Forbes skillfully dodged the blows. Jink then attempted a water balloon attack, but Forbes evaded it effortlessly. Smirking, Forbes taunted that Jink couldn't touch him before landing a strike. Realizing his attacks were futile against Forbes' anticipation, Jink recalled the second squad's advice that Forbes wasn't skilled in fencing. He resolved to wear him out and not give him a moment's rest. Jink briefly thought of Esther and Nina, who were supposed to aid him. Meanwhile, the first squad stood facing Nina and Esther. The tension rose as both sides prepared for confrontation. However, as they moved forward, the ground, wet from the earlier water magic, caused the entire first squad to stumble and fall. Confusion spread among them as Forbes tried to understand what was happening. Jink smiled, realizing their plan had succeeded. He had used a jelly made from boiled slime, which he had sprayed during the big wave. A mercenary cried out that it wasn't fair. Esther noticed that the person who wanted to attack his brother was talking about it. Esther began attacking the first squad with an air cutter. Nina raised her sword and called for an air cyclone. Dan and Young grabbed the mercenaries, forcing their faces onto the ground. Dan smiled and informed Jink that they were done. Jink continued to fight with Forbes. At one point, he asked Forbes what had happened and if the guy would help his friends. Forbes kept blocking Jink's punches, understanding that if he turned away, Jink would end him. He was trying to figure out how he could use the prediction to win the fight. Forbes found himself surrounded and froze, looking around. Jink asked Forbes to use the prediction and what he saw in the future. Forbes dropped his sword, knelt, and put his hands behind his head. He chuckled and said he was giving up. The mercenaries from the second squad begged for mercy and were ready to give any information. They couldn't believe Forbes had given up so easily. Esther said they already had enough prisoners and witnesses. He asked Jink if they could tie them to a tree to be eaten by monsters, but Jink said they would need them again. Jink said they would prepare the best cage for Forbes. Forbes was put in a cage lifted by a stone golem. Jink said they were going to the 30th floor, to the safe zone, warning that it would be cold. He said he would only give Forbes warm clothes. Forbes thanked Jink uncertainly. Jink continued, saying he would give Forbes some water and he could drink as much as he wanted. Forbes chuckled and said it wasn't worth worrying about. The mercenaries in the cages swore at Forbes. The squad and the stone golems walked through the forest. Ian informed them they would arrive at the safe zone soon. He turned to them and asked how they would explain this to the other clans. Jink asked if they should just tell it like it is, saying that even if there are scouts on the 30th floor, there is still a chance they will collide. Jink said they had to show everyone that this is how it should be, suggesting they could make friends with other clans. Dan volunteered to explain everything to them, being the head of the guild. Jink thanked Dan and then turned to the rest of the squad, suggesting not to provoke the other clans. Jink met Leon, who smiled and asked what happened. Jink rubbed the back of his head and said they hadn't seen Leon for a long time, claiming it took him a long time to talk about what happened. Dan approached Leon and said he would explain everything. Leon immediately recognized Dan as the head of the guild. Dan explained that outside of detention, they hunted for Jink. Leon was surprised and asked what it meant. Dan said they had to do this because they were mercenaries and the main criminals were the perpetrators. The mercenaries watched Dan and Leon's dialogue, cursing and wondering what they should do now. Forbes stared intently at Leon, then widened his eyes as he noticed a man from the third squad. He understood that one of them had disappeared among the other clans. Forbes realized they could not allow Jink to advance further, believing that the 30th floor was their last chance. He began to think about what he would do when he was free. As Jink turned around and looked at Forbes, Forbes looked surprised. He looked at the guy intently and told someone that there was still time. Jink asked what was going on with Forbes. Forbes tried to say something, but Jink interrupted him, shouting that if he did, they would all die. In a panic, Jink asked if Forbes had been using foresight. Someone then told Jink to die, and Jink's squad was attacked by mercenaries from the Purgatory's third squad. All the witnesses became ashes. The third squad, which had been hiding among the people, attacked the adventurers and yelled for the witnesses to burn. The adventurers screamed in pain. Jink used water magic and created a wall of water to shield himself from the fire. The man from the third squad was furious, shouting that everything had happened because of Jink, claiming that he had already destroyed their clan. Jink looked at the man and thought he was unhinged since he had burned his own comrades and the participants of the Elder Tree. Despite this, the man continued to scream. At that moment, Jink approached him and landed a decisive blow. The man's eyes rolled back and he fell to the ground. Dan ordered the squads to apprehend the remaining suspects. The squad immediately started capturing the mercenaries. Jink called out to Ian to heal Leon, who was lying on the ground. Ian rushed towards Jink, instructing Esther and Nina to assist him. As Jink gazed at Leon, he realized he had been too naive. He hadn't considered what a desperate man was capable of. If he had foreseen this, the Elder Tree wouldn't have been harmed, and the situation wouldn't have escalated. The mercenaries approached Dan, pleading with him to wait. They tried to convince him that, although they were now free, they were unaware of the murder. They asked for his trust. Dan suggested that they had been manipulated for someone else's gain. He offered them a chance to prove their innocence by assisting in bringing the others to justice. He advised them to avoid entering the maze for the time being, instead focusing on simpler tasks like disassembly and cleaning. When the mercenaries mentioned they had no money, they apologized. They thanked Dan for the magical treatment and potions. Dan acknowledged that thanks to everyone's efforts, including the Elder Tree, no lives had been lost. The mercenaries expressed gratitude once more and apologized. Leon approached Jink, asserting that they were capable of protecting themselves as adventurers. Dan instructed everyone who had been injured to return to the surface and testify. Leon said he would help, but couldn't forgive outside of confinement. He asked what they wanted to do with the stake. Dan turned around, looked at the captured mercenaries, and said their sins had become even heavier. He wondered what kind of reprimand they would be given. The man remembered they had stolen information from them and understood there would be consequences. All the squads, along with golems and mercenaries, moved to the surface, passing through the cold floor. Jink kept the fire burning in his hand. The mercenaries also had a fire in their cage. Forbes had been sitting in a cage, freezing all this time. The knights met them at the exit. The commander-in-chief approached and asked how they had gotten there. The guy replied that it had been good and thanked them for welcoming his squad. The mercenaries cried with happiness, glad they had survived. The commander-in-chief asked if they were suspected participants outside of detention. Jink looked at the mercenaries and said they had been told they were connected to the Nazar country. He mentioned there had been a battle as a result, and many had died. He thought there were enough witnesses left. The commander-in-chief smiled and said they would take care of the prisoners and interrogate them. The man turned to Jink and asked if he wanted to tell everything in a day at the guild. The commander-in-chief said their squad was tired, so he let them rest. Jink sat on the bed and talked about how they had come a long way and gotten out of a long battle alive. Nina smiled and said that after the sleeping bag, the bed seemed even softer. Jink looked at the girl with a smile and said the whole squad was afraid of being out of custody. He assured the girl they had settled in the best and safest hotel. Ian looked at his partners with one eye and said the country had repaid them with accommodation. He said they could stay in this place for a month. Geeson said he was not against this given the situation with the stake. Esther said they didn't know they were going to be attacked. He also mentioned Dan's case and the truth serum. It seemed to him that it had been somehow inconvenient. Jink interrupted his brother's speech and said they still had things to do. He suggested they go to bed and sleep. Everyone agreed. The next day, Jink met with Daniel Funk, who had been the Duke of the Kingdom of K. He felt relieved to meet Jink. Daniel explained that he was in charge of their case regarding being out of custody. Jink felt nervous as he met this important person. He responded hesitantly that he was also pleased to meet Daniel. Daniel casually ate a cookie and remarked that Jink seemed friendly. He suggested skipping formalities. Daniel grinned and assured Jink that he didn't need to worry. Jink hesitantly agreed with him, though he thought Daniel seemed too calm and a bit rude. Daniel then shared that he and Dan were from the same family. Jink began to understand their behavior better. Dan, Daniel explained, was from a poorer branch of the family and was the fifth son of a concubine. He didn't have the money for schooling as a child and spent his time wielding a sword on the field. Daniel mentioned how, as a child, he managed things at Dan's parents' house, serving as a connection between them. Continuing, Daniel explained that Dan had always been rebellious. Despite the Funko family seeing potential in him, Dan resisted becoming a vassal. At the age of 12, he disappeared, becoming an adventurer in Gamel before starting his own business. Daniel expressed concern that Dan might be expelled from the guild and urged him to return, offering him various positions. Though Dan saw it as a good option, Jink doubted his usefulness and declined the offer. Daniel reassured Dan that he wouldn't give up on him. Jink realized that Duke Funko wanted to bring Dan back and wondered if Dan would be able to handle the responsibility. Daniel informed them that all evidence linking out-of-custody individuals to the Nazar country had been presented in court. He asked for Dan and Jink's input on what to do with the participants. Jink suggested eliminating them to prevent any chance of revenge. Dan revealed that after torture and interrogation, the participants' assets had been seized. He believed they could sell these assets and give the money to the Elder Tree. After formal sentencing, they would be dealt with by the state court. Jink inquired about Marquis Putel's status and assumed he was still gathering information. Daniel assured them not to worry, as Putel had been captured. He explained that Putel had been arrested for trying to take their servants hostage and had spilled secrets under pressure. Unlike outside of prison, Putel didn't have any valuable information. His fate would be determined after punishment. Daniel revealed that due to Nezar's aggression and the impact of Jink and Rosarda's espionage, King Kola had decided to attack Nazar and Rosarda. Jink and Dan were surprised by this news. Jink wondered why the attack was happening. Daniel speculated it was for show. He mentioned that Putel's body had been sent to Rosarda. Jink realized they needed to secure Gamel, the largest city, to win. With Dan likely removed from his post, they urgently needed a new guild head. Daniel approached Jink asking how he felt. He apologized for delaying the conversation, explaining that he couldn't discuss certain topics in front of Dan. Jink assured him everything was okay. Daniel mentioned he had earlier advised Dan to visit, understanding it was a tough situation for him, even if he didn't show it. Daniel thought Dan was struggling as he was being kicked out of the guild and losing his adventurer rank. He expressed concern that without a similar position, Dan might face ridicule from unsavory characters. Jink agreed, noting Dan's combat skills and wondering why he was being let go. After some thought, Jink suggested forming a new clan, with Dan being a lower-level member as a form of punishment. They considered seeking amnesty from the king for Dan. Daniel agreed to sign the petition, believing it would have a stronger impact if their names were attached. He promised to return with the results in a few days. A few days later, Dan arrived, greeting Jink as an ordinary adventurer. He happily agreed to work for the clan. Jink stopped him, feeling he was being too formal. Daniel explained that thanks to the petition, Dan admitted guilt easily and was released from punishment, but now had to join the clan for 5 years. He added that the guild didn't want to lose someone like Dan. Dan explained he resigned voluntarily to lessen the fallout. Jink wondered if they needed a new guild head. At that moment, 2 girls arrived. Daniel announced Kami would be the interim head until a permanent replacement was found, citing her status as the wife of a famous adventurer. Jink remarked that Dana had already been forgotten, prompting Dan to angrily silence him. Dan then thanked Jink and Daniel for their help, finding his embarrassment cute. Jink asked Dan what he wanted to do, noting the clan didn't have a name. Dan agreed to help and asked Jenna to train the maids to match the capital's strength, as they needed someone to manage them. Jink suggested giving them enchanted items and accompanying them to the slime dungeon. Dan agreed, recalling it was where he found many magic stones. Jink also secured a discount on a house purchase from an aristocrat associated with Dan's release from prison. Dan sighed heavily and asked why Jink needed the money. Jink replied that he was running low on funds because he kept spending it to help someone. He mentioned it might not pay off. Daniel smiled and said they needed to address the issue of being out of custody. He asked Jink to accompany him to the trial. Jink understood that the outcome seemed certain, even though it was just an initial hearing. During the meeting, Jink was allowed to testify. Standing in the center of the courtroom, Jink shared that while searching the tropical maze, he accidentally overheard a conversation about a plan to capture him. The person speaking broke down in tears, admitting he was scared that more experienced adventurers would target him. He tried to convey his fear and anxiety when recalling those days. The judge remarked that such descriptions painted all suspects as ruthless individuals. Continuing, the judge announced that due to years of attacks on the Coal Kingdom, a decision had been made. The mercenaries would be punished by receiving thousands of lashes while being healed. Additionally, they would be tattooed on their faces and hands to mark their serious crimes. Furthermore, they were sentenced to a lifetime of hard labor as criminal slaves. Observers in the courtroom voiced their agreement that the mercenaries deserved such a fate. A man in armor began speaking negatively about the mercenaries. Jink noticed him and asked Dan who he was. Dan looked at the man and identified him as the master of the clan, Herbert. Dan said that Herbert was the leader of the emissaries' clan. Jink looked at Herbert and wondered if his best skill truly lay in using a spear. Jink thought about how the range of their attacks was longer than his swords. Herbert realized that even if he used magic, he would still lose. But Jink had no intention of fighting him. Herbert looked at Jink, chuckled, and then told his followers to bring him some sake. They cheered enthusiastically. He then mentioned that any tears shed outside of their confinement would be a treat for him. Herbert suddenly became more imposing and approached the mercenaries asking if they had considered their actions. He explained that he had extracted information from them. He put his hand on one mercenary's shoulder, apologizing for having to treat them roughly. He expressed his regret for hurting others. Herbert offered to forgive the mercenaries if they paid him double this month, which they agreed to, thanking him. Jink asked if Herbert had come to the trial on purpose, which Dan confirmed, saying Herbert wanted to display his strength. Dan claimed that because of Herbert, the emissaries' clan had an advantage and no one would complain about him. Another mercenary was brought into the hall, and Dan wearily said it was his turn. Jink mentioned that the former head of the guild, who had been fired due to a leak, got off lightly. He hoped the same for Dan. Dan turned to the guy and asked if he had enemies and if he was well-liked when he led the guild. Jink argued that the punishment wasn't severe, so people shouldn't criticize him. He warned that anyone who did so would be arrested by the guards. Dan acknowledged everything. A few days later, Dan received a mild punishment. He was tied to a post in front of the guild for all to see. This was a common punishment for those who lost the trust of the Adventurers Guild. Esther asked his brother if nothing serious would happen. Jink was only concerned that Herbert might be nearby instead of in the maze. He had heard a rumor that Herbert was freeing former participants from prison. When Jink investigated, Herbert was busy with something else. So Jink gave Dan a ring enchanted with wind magic for protection. He sensed that the elder tree and the harp were involved in the case. Feeling that something was amiss, Esther drew her brother's attention to mercenaries approaching with weapons. They had recently been punished by Herbert, and Jink wondered what they were up to. The mercenaries took out their weapons, and Jink and Esther immediately protested. The mercenaries started hurling weapons at Dan. Dan used the ring to create an air shield, stopping the weapons just before they hit him. The mercenaries called Dan a coward for using magic, and insisted he accept his punishment. Jink approached and reminded them that during a mild punishment, throwing objects was forbidden. Jink said that according to guild rules, Dan could defend himself against such behavior. He pointed out that the mercenaries were breaking guild rules in front of everyone. The mercenaries started to get angry, but Jink stopped them. Jink mentioned that the emissaries' participants had bought up all the broken weapons from weapon shops a few days ago. He asked if these were the weapons the mercenaries were throwing. One mercenary admitted they were old weapons they used when they were with the emissaries. They had taken them to sell after leaving the clan. Jink was just starting to learn how to handle different types of weapons, but he wasn't making much progress. Yang suggested he check the shops to see what gear the emissaries the experienced fighters had bought. Jink agreed, but he pointed out they didn't have to because they weren't like them. While assessing their skills, Jink noticed their weapons didn't match those of the mercenaries. This made the mercenaries suspicious. Jink thought if they were caught, they might be fined. The leader of the mercenaries then ordered them to leave. Jink waved goodbye and asked them to clean up their mess. Herbert said Dan had been right all along. He had thought he could take advantage of the situation. In the clan house of the emissaries, Herbert grabbed a man by the head and slammed him against a table. He suggested the man had other plans. Herbert felt disgraced in front of Jink by the mercenaries' actions. He was annoyed that Fawn would now interfere in their affairs, making it harder for him to gather supporters. The mercenaries watching thought not only the enchanter, but also the Duke and the gun shop would now support Herbert. One of them said if the emissaries intervened, they wouldn't be able to handle the consequences. Herbert got angry and threatened to torture Jink. Meanwhile, in the clan house of the Jink, Yang approached Jink with the news. He said he had been banned from a gun store in the city. Jink asked what it meant. Yang explained that when he asked about the emissaries, everyone got scared and told him to leave. Jink had thought Herbert wasn't very smart, but it turned out he was wrong. He suspected they intended to block them from restocking their weapons. He thought they wanted to corner them without the possibility of buying supplies. Yang suggested they could purchase weapons and supplies through his father's Chamber of Commerce. He believed there were plenty of big merchants outside of Gamal. He was convinced that even the emissaries couldn't control everything. Jink grew more serious and wondered if they could immobilize the emissaries. Yang had an idea and suggested asking Duke Fonker for help. Jink hesitated, still seeing Yang as a villain. The maid interrupted, bringing them tea and asking about a black aura she noticed in the room. 3 days later, news spread that the emissaries were the instigators. A crowd gathered on the street discussing the situation loudly. Jink and Yang began spreading rumors, starting with Duke Fonker. The embarrassing rumors made Herbert unable to leave his clan house. Jink also arranged for Duke Fonker's merchant to take over the gun store. He believed this would make it difficult for the emissaries to pressure him. Weapons were crafted by maids using alchemical magic, increasing their reserve. Jink decided they were returning to the capital, partly due to an invitation from Duke Fonker to participate in declaring war on the Kingdom of Rosarda. Dan, now a member of the Jink's clan, asked if he should go too. Jink assured him things were calm for now, but there was still a chance the emissaries might seek revenge. Dan decided to stay in Gamel as a liaison. As they looked over the city, Dan asked Jink if he planned to go to war. He believed the country would seek his help. Jink acknowledged Dan's support and felt he didn't have to fight. Eventually, Jink arrived at the royal capital, noticing an increased presence of royal guards. The king greeted him, apologizing for summoning him so quickly after his arrival. Jink welcomed the conversation, thinking it would be productive. The king first prepared a reward for Jink's achievements in uncovering the secrets of the clan depths of Purgatory. He assumed Jink had already received a reward from the guild, but this one would be from the country. A servant handed Jink a scroll, listing gems as a reward. Additionally, Jink was allowed to grant commoner status to his slaves, Ian and Nina, or transition them from a slave contract to a subordinate contract. Jink didn't expect much from Duke Fonker, but he was glad Fonker did what he asked. Jink believed Nina and Ian had suffered enough and hoped to restore their commoner status one day. He planned to cancel the obedience magic upon his return and thanked the king for the opportunity. Jink wanted to request the same for Esther and Urza, but knew it wasn't the right time due to Rosarda's unstable situation. He thought it safer for them to remain as they were, being cared for. The king revealed that Rosarta and Nazar, whose alliance had collapsed, were on the brink of war. Troops were being concentrated in border cities, including Korta, ready for attack once war was declared. The border was divided by a river, and the city was heavily barricaded. Daniel assured that there wouldn't be a major battle there as Rosarda was busy fighting Nazar. Nazar had captured a third of Rosarda's territory, but there were problems within its army due to the climate and a plague outbreak. Potion consumption was high and supplies were dwindling. The vast wealth gap in Rosarda led to unsanitary conditions in some areas. The king saw this as an advantage, believing Rosarda had already been defeated by the plague. He planned to send their army to destroy both kingdoms. However, there was a problem that Jink needed to solve: a shortage of magic bags for transporting potions and drinking water. Daniel proposed mass-producing magic bags, and Jink agreed. The idea of using water magic to create drinking water was suggested, but the king emphasized the importance of mana reserves in battles, especially for saving lives. Jink proposed a condition that adventurers and merchants from Labyrinth City, not just the country, have access to the accessories. The king agreed to sell half of the produced items to the people after the war. With that settled, they shifted the discussion to Nazar, home to the Bernhard house, a family of necromancers. Daniel explained that Bernhard had existed for a long time, with a rich history closely tied to the Nar royal family, and they were feared like the trump card of the Nazar kingdom. He mentioned there were around 100 people in the Bernhard family with necromancy abilities, which is why they aim to have many children and only raise those with a talent for necromancy. Currently, they have 8 pure necromancers. He believed they could be defeated through sheer numbers, although the king pointed out their army couldn't ignore the death toll. Jink realized fighting necromancers was tricky because as long as there were corpses, whether rotted or skeletal, they were hard to control without using magic. The only way to defeat them was to destroy the corpses or deal with the necromancer directly. However, killing one corpse often meant facing another, making it a challenging fight. An aristocrat suggested that if the king and his army could hold out, the necromancers would eventually run out of mana, but they needed to consider how many soldiers they might lose in the process. Turning to Jink for his opinion, he suggested avoiding a direct confrontation with the Bernhards. Instead, he proposed instilling fear in enemy soldiers by using fire and wind magic simultaneously to destroy their military supplies and food through burning and sudden night attacks. Daniel believed that such tactics would gradually undermine the morale of Nazar's entire army. Bing agreed, seeing it as a realistic and effective strategy. He suggested incorporating Jink's plan into their overall strategy and apologized for wanting Jink to start making accessories immediately. Jink returned home and began crafting accessories. After a while, Jink managed to create over 1,000 accessories. Suddenly, a maid entered the room and announced the arrival of Alexander from the Dragon Tier Squad. Jink wondered why Alex had come to see them. He figured the Dragon Tier Squad had been stationed in the royal capital for a while now. Curious about Alex's visit, Alex greeted Jink warmly, mentioning it had been a long time since they last saw each other. He explained he'd heard about Jink starting a clan and had come to inquire about joining. Grateful for their past interactions, Alex asked for Jink's thoughts on the matter. Jink expressed interest in expanding the clan and welcomed Alex's request. Alex mentioned the possibility of people trying to exploit their clan and suggested making a magic contract to prevent that. He offered to cover the costs, and Jink agreed to the terms. Jink inquired if Alex had encountered members of the Sacred Flame group. Alex mentioned they got along well with them and revealed their plan to participate in the war against Rosarda. However, Alex admitted he didn't personally care about the conflict, but he felt a sense of duty to his homeland. Jink noted that the Adventurers Guild was recruiting mercenaries. Sensing Alex's discomfort with the situation, he suggested delaying their exploration of the maze until later, citing ongoing battles with a large clan called the Emissaries. Jink mentioned that the weapons he crafted were being delivered to Duke Von Daly at a discounted price, which boosted the gun shop's business. He assured Alex that the clan's payment would be cheaper than the market price and offered to handle the paperwork the next day. Alex agreed, and a few days later, they met at Call Castle. The king condemned the mercenaries, accusing them of attempting to kidnap an enchanter and illegally invading the land. He declared these actions unforgivable, likening them to the invasion of Nazar Kingdom's spies. The king then ordered the execution of the mercenaries and declared war on Nazar and Rosarda, catalyzing a conflict spurred by Jink's existence. Following the king's decree, the invasion of the 3 cities bordering Rosarda commenced immediately. Count Brand, who had looked after Jink before, led the state army. As expected, Rosarda's army surrendered easily, and the city of Corda fell completely under Count Brand's control. Jink arrived at Brando's mansion and was welcomed by boys from a family of knights. Jink greeted them and inquired about Chris's well-being. The other two brothers, Roy and Lewis, also greeted Jink. They were twin brothers from the Hughes family. Jink asked if they had encountered any damage from the marquee, to which the guys initially admitted, but then reassured Jink that everything was under control since they had secured protection. Curious about why the brothers were at the mansion, Jink inquired further. Roy explained that he saw the war as an opportunity to contemplate his future career and serve honorably. His brother added that they planned to enlist in the army. Chris then asked if Jink wanted to hear about his father's military service and court information, which was the reason he had come. Chris revealed that his father had confiscated the weapons and property of Rosarda's remaining residents. He mentioned that the nobles and landowners would face public execution once captured. Feeling disheartened by the fate of the defeated country, Jink expressed concern about the long-term consequences of enslaving everyone. Chris explained that ordinary citizens were being forced into servitude by the aristocracy of the invading forces. He mentioned rumors that children would lose their noble status as they grew up. Jink pondered the grim reality of perpetual slavery and its impact on productivity. Chris shared plans to march to Ruta, the capital, with the army of the people's aristocracy. After seizing the capital, they intended to vanquish the soldiers of Rosarda and Nazar. Chris eagerly anticipated participating in this campaign, viewing it as an opportunity for combat experience. He was pleased to be fighting alongside his father, believing it was the only way he could truly make a difference on the front lines, despite potentially irritating the soldiers. Acknowledging Chris's position as the heir, Jink reminded him of the need to discuss a specific matter first. Jink had returned home and shared news of an upcoming war with Esther. He explained that joining the state army to fight against their former homeland would grant him full citizenship. While discussing, he noticed Esther becoming emotional and wondered if he disagreed. Nearby maids started teasing Jink for making his brother cry. Esther cried because he thought Jink was abandoning him due to being a burden, but Jink quickly reassured him. Jink clarified that he simply wanted Esther to achieve success independently, promising to support him later. He assured his brother that he would be with Ian in the rear guard and provide him with enchanted items. Although Jink wanted to accompany Esther, he was worried. However, Esther insisted he would be fine alone and suggested Ian stay with Jink. Jink questioned if Esther would manage alone and remembered Dan, who held a grudge against Nazar for past events with the Purgatory clan. Esther accepted the condition and vowed to make Jink proud. Subsequently, Alex and the rest of the Dragon Tier squad officially joined Jink's clan. According to the guild's assessment, they were registered as A-ranked. Meanwhile, at Duke Funker's mansion, a group of aristocrats expressed their disdain toward Daniel for exploiting the Purgatory clan issue to eliminate his political rivals. They were appalled that he was hosting a party and had extended invitations to them. They searched for any incriminating evidence against Daniel, but found none. Their frustration grew when they realized that they were not being attended to despite being guests. One of them attempted to leave the room to lodge a complaint when suddenly a massive spear sliced through the door, revealing an enraged Herbert in search of Duke Funker. The aristocrats panicked and sought assistance, but Herbert's men had already subdued the nearby servants and were now searching for Duke Funker. Herbert then demanded the aristocrats reveal Duke Funker's whereabouts, threatening them if they refused. Shortly after, Jink received reports that Duke Funker's estate had been attacked by the emissary's clan, which left him anxious. A servant of Duke Funker reassured Jink that his master was unharmed, as Funker happened to be in the capital at the time. Handing Jink a document, the servant explained that it detailed how Herbert and his group, accompanied by some blacksmiths, had forcibly entered the estate after their attempts at blackmail failed to yield results with Jink and Duke Funker. Luckily, Duke Funker and the merchants had caught wind of Herbert's scheme and escaped before the assault. Though Jink was relieved to hear that the Duke was safe, he remained concerned about the damage inflicted upon the estate. The servant, however, allayed his worries by revealing that the enemies Duke Funker had invited to a supposed party were discovered deceased instead. Consequently, Herbert and his entire clan were now wanted criminals, with a punitive force set to be dispatched promptly. Learning this, Jink couldn't help but shiver at the thought of Duke Funker's ruthless tactics, utilizing leaked information of the attack to eliminate his adversaries. He felt fortunate to be on Funker's side. As the servant reminded Jink of his audience with the king, Jink affirmed his attendance. Meanwhile, Herbert vented his frustration by smashing wine bottles, realizing they had fallen into Duke Funker's trap and were essentially doomed, facing the loss of their adventurer's license. Contemplating their next move, Herbert dismissed Rosarda and Naza as viable options. Instead, he instructed his men to prepare for a journey to Yamato. despite their concerns of being apprehended at the border. Herbert then revealed a secret to alleviate their fears. The 67th floor of the Maze of Gamel provided a direct passage to Yamato. Even though Yamato bordered Qual, it had its own uniqueness and resembled historic Japan. Herbert's men were shocked to learn that the maze was connected to Yamato. Herbert shared that there had been smuggling between Qual and Yamato from the start. He claimed it wouldn't be easy going through the maze, but at least they wouldn't be wanted men on the other side. His men then excitedly prepared for their maze escape, but Herbert purposely didn't tell them something important for his own benefit. Meanwhile, in the Gamel maze, Chris, Lewis, and Roy showed off their magic skills. Jink praised the three for doing well. He also thanked Dan for supporting the maids. He reminded everyone that they had 1 week left. Everyone excitedly followed Jink's lead and focused on leveling up in the maze since Esther, Chris, and the others were going to have their first battle soon. Later, in the Adventurers Guild's office, Jink asked Dan to take care of Esther for the next day's battle. He also confirmed with the Guildmaster, Alpha, that he would join the emissary's strike force since he was responsible for the mess. Alpha reported that Herbert's 1st Legion had gone to the maze with him while the 2nd Legion had already been taken care of. Dan heard that Herbert had snuck off while everyone was asleep and doubted that he could clear the dungeon despite being S-ranked. He also assumed Herbert didn't want any dead weight. It was presumed that Herbert and his gang were already between floors 16 and 30 of the maze. Jink called them slow, but Alpha claimed it was fast enough, and on top of that, they could determine which floor they were on since no one survived meeting Herbert most of the time. Reports said that witnesses were killed in the maze upon meeting the emissary's 1st Legion. As for those emissaries who had been captured, they were sentenced to slavery. Dan also confirmed that Jink would receive any assets the captured emissaries had. Jink was totally fine with that. The meeting ended, and Jink noticed Alpha's sad expression as she left. Mona asked Jink what was wrong, and Jink said Alpha looked dejected. Mona explained that it was a matter between a husband and wife. Dan had been busy the whole time and didn't give enough attention to Alpha. On top of that, Dan was going to be deployed to the front line the next day. Jink felt bad since he believed it was entirely his fault. To prevent a fallout between the married couple, Jink felt responsible to do something and chased Alpha in the hallway. He apologized for keeping Dan away from her due to work. Alpha was fine with it since Dan was working for Jink. Jink didn't want to overstep, but he presented Alpha with a box that Esther had grabbed when running away from their family. Alpha then opened the box and suddenly turned bright red. Jink asked if she liked it. Alpha promised to put it to good use. The next morning, everyone assembled, and Jink wished Esther, Chris, Louis, and Roy luck in their first battle. Esther promised not to ruin his brother's reputation. Suddenly, Jink received a punch from Dan, who was mad after Alpha received a strong aphrodisiac that hurt his back. Jink claimed he was saving their marriage. Esther tried to defend his brother, but Jink said it was fine since he was at fault. Chris then bade farewell after the preparation and left with the others and many soldiers. Jink and Ian went to the strike force's meeting place. A group of middle-aged men arrived along with a fairy named Cannon as their leader. Jink was surprised to see a fairy for the first time, and her abilities were impressive. He was worried because her nickname was Tiny Devil. Cannon shared that they had 2 routes to chase the emissaries. She suggested Jink should decide since her team could handle either path, though one was a bit dangerous. Cannon explained that there was another entrance to the Gamel maze which was currently tightly secured. It was a giant hole that dropped straight down to the 15th floor, and they had special permission to use it as a shortcut. Jink and Ian didn't know about this, and Cannon explained that only the top leaders in Qual were aware of it. Their other option was to climb down from the 1st floor, which was the safest route. Jink realized that Herbert would escape if they took too long, but it was dangerous to take the shortcut with Nina. Ian suggested they look at it first before deciding. Jink understood it was risky either way and chose to take the dangerous shortcut. Cannon agreed but told him to let her know if he changed his mind. Soon after, they went to the shortcut and Jink couldn't even see the bottom of the hole. Cannon wondered if Jink was scared, but Jink denied it. He started climbing down and cursed Herbert for this. After some time, they reached the bottom. He was surprised at how different it was from the normal floors and fully understood why the other Strike Force members were ranked S. The members claimed they were just better at hiding their fears compared to others. Cannon shared that some would climb the hole as a challenge, but she couldn't relate since she had wings. Jink felt jealous of her and then suggested they take out Elliot, the boss monster in the area.